Tonight you are about to step into a forgotten world long before civilization where every night could be your last. There are no cities here, no farms, and certainly no comfortable beds waiting beyond the trees. Instead, darkness settles across an African landscape nearly 2 million years before your birth. Grass moves softly beneath the wind. Somewhere beyond the fading light, unfamiliar animals call across a wide valley. And beside a small cluster of ancient humans stands someone who should make you reconsider what survival really means. Because the longest-lasting human species was not Homo sapiens. It was a human ancestor that walked across continents, endured enormous climate shifts, and survived for roughly 2 million years. Its name was Homo erectus. How could a species without writing cities or modern technology survive for so unimaginably long? And why did its remarkable story finally end? Before we step deeper into the darkness of tonight's story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe for more calming historical journeys. And tell me in the comments where you are listening from and what your local time is tonight. Now dim the lights. Section 1. And allow the modern world around you to disappear for a while. The room becomes quieter, and the familiar edges of your surroundings slowly dissolve into darkness. When the landscape returns, almost everything has changed. You are standing beneath an enormous African sky around 1.9 million years ago. The air is warm, although evening has begun pulling cooler currents through the open grass. Dry stems brush gently against your legs as you move toward a shallow rise. You smell dust, sun-warmed vegetation, and something faintly smoky carried from very far away. There is no road beneath your feet. Cultivated field interrupts the horizon. There is only a patchwork of grassland, scattered woodland streams, and distant volcanic highlands. This is Eastern Africa during the early Pleistocene. Several different kinds of ancient humans already inhabit parts of this changing world. Some are small-bodied creatures descended from much earlier hominins. Others represent newer branches of humanity beginning to experiment with larger bodies and expanding brains. Then you notice one figure walking across the open ground. At first, the silhouette seems surprisingly familiar. The individual stands upright with long legs beneath a relatively narrow torso. The arms no longer reach downward, with the unusually long proportions seen in earlier tree-climbing ancestors. Each stride covers the ground efficiently. You could almost recognize the rhythm. Almost. The skull would immediately remind you that this traveller does not belong to your species. A long, low braincase extends backward above a heavy brow ridge. The face projects more strongly than yours while the forehead remains low. There is no prominent chin, yet beneath those differences stands a body increasingly designed for life on the ground. You are looking at a member of the human lineage commonly called Homo erectus. The name means upright human, although upright walking existed millions of years before this species appeared. Victorian-era scientific naming could occasionally be a little dramatic. The important distinction lies elsewhere. With Homo erectus, the human body begins taking on proportions that feel distinctly closer to your own. Longer legs make traveling across open landscapes more economical. Shorter arms suggest reduced dependence upon climbing compared with earlier hominins. The chest and pelvis also differ from those of both earlier humans and modern people. Together, these features produce an animal capable of moving remarkably well across large territories. That ability will become important, very important, because the people before you will eventually spread across distances no earlier human lineage had managed. Their fossils will appear thousands of kilometers apart. Their populations will experience grasslands, forests, tropical islands, dry regions, and colder northern environments. And their basic evolutionary story will continue through a span of time almost impossible to imagine. Modern Homo sapiens have existed for roughly 300,000 years. That feels ancient when compared with recorded history. Agriculture appeared only within roughly the last 12,000 years. The Egyptian pyramids suddenly seem like yesterday. Yet populations usually associated with Homo erectus persisted for well over 1 million years, perhaps approaching 2 million depending on classification. You stand quietly and try to feel that amount of time. It refuses to fit inside your imagination. Suppose every 1,000 years became a single step along a path. Human civilization would occupy only the final few steps behind you. The lifespan associated with Homo erectus would stretch across an immense road disappearing beyond the horizon. And still they walked. That extraordinary duration explains why calling them simply primitive misses almost everything interesting about their success. A species does not remain across changing environments for such enormous periods by failing at survival. These humans could find food, they could reproduce, they could raise vulnerable children, they could respond to dangerous landscapes. They could probably communicate socially in ways that fossilized bones cannot preserve. What exactly those relationships looked like remains hidden. Nobody left a diary beside an Herculean hand axe. Still, the simplest evidence is almost embarrassingly obvious. They survived. Nearby, several individuals move towards a stand of trees beside shallow water. One carries something dark and rounded. Perhaps it is stone. Perhaps food. At this distance, you cannot know. A smaller individual follows close behind an adult. Another pauses and looks across the grass. You hear insects humming around the water. Bird calls drift from somewhere overhead. The wind slides softly through leaves with a dry, whispering sound. There is something strangely ordinary about the scene. That may be the most surprising detail of all. These humans are not spending every second fighting dramatic predators beneath cinematic thunderstorms. Most prehistoric life, like most modern life, probably contained long stretches of routine. Walking, searching, waiting, resting, watching children, choosing stones, remembering water, trying not to become someone else's dinner. That last concern does complicate the evening slightly. Large carnivores share this landscape. Early Pleistocene. Africa contains powerful cats, hyenas, crocodiles, and other predators capable of treating an isolated hominin as an opportunity. But Homo erectus is neither helpless nor simply waiting for disaster. Group living changes the balance. Height improves visibility across open ground. Mobility allows individuals to travel between resources. Tools offer access to foods unavailable through teeth and hands alone. There is also an odd clue preserved in one especially famous fossil. In Kenya, researchers discovered the skeleton often called Turkana boy or Nario Kotum boy. He lived roughly 1.0 to 1.6 million years ago and died while still young. His skeleton is unusually complete for such an ancient human. It reveals a tall, long-legged body dramatically unlike earlier Australopithecines. Depending on reconstruction and growth estimates, he may have stood around 160 centimeters when he died. Had he reached adulthood, he might have become considerably taller. His bones give you something fossils rarely provide. They let you imagine movement. You can picture those legs carrying him along shorelines beneath a fierce equatorial sun. You can imagine dust gathering around his ankles. You can imagine the physical confidence of a body built for sustained travel. Yet even Turkana boy creates questions rather than simple answers. Researchers continue debating how quickly Homo erectus children matured compared with modern humans. Dental development suggests childhood differed from your unusually prolonged modern pattern. But exactly where it fell between earlier apes and later humans remains uncertain. That uncertainty matters because childhood shapes everything. A longer childhood allows greater learning. It increases dependence upon adults. It changes family relationships and social cooperation. If Homo erectus development was becoming slower, their communities may have required increasingly complex caregiving. You cannot watch that directly tonight. You can only stand beside the ancient grass and notice the smaller figure keeping close to an adult. Sometimes prehistory whispers rather than speaks. There is another mystery hidden inside the name itself. Not every scientist agrees that all early African fossils should be called Homo erectus. Some researchers prefer separating certain African populations as Homo ergaster. Others treat them as early regional forms within a broader Homo erectus species. The disagreement may sound like scholarly housekeeping. It is actually fundamental. You are asking whether one enormously successful species stretched across continents or whether several closely related populations shared similar bodies and lifestyles. For tonight, you can keep both possibilities beside you. The ancient people themselves did not care what future scientists placed on museum labels. They had more immediate concerns. The light is fading. The air cools against your skin. The group near the trees has stopped moving farther from the water. One adult turns toward the darkening plain. Another settles onto the ground. Their world contains no knowledge of what lies ahead. They do not know their descendants, relatives, or evolutionary cousins will eventually reach distant parts of Eurasia. They do not know oceans will rise and fall around Southeast Asian islands. They cannot imagine future humans uncovering their skulls beneath layers of ancient sediment. And they certainly do not know that another human species will eventually spend entire careers arguing about them. That seems slightly unfair, but it is also strangely beautiful. Because from your distant viewpoint you already know something they cannot. You know this lineage will endure, not for a century, not for 10,000 years, but across an almost incomprehensible depth of evolutionary time. Before their story reaches Java, China, Georgia, and perhaps several overlapping branches of the human family, everything begins with bodies capable of moving. Soon you will follow those bodies more closely. You will notice what changed in their shoulders, hips, legs, breathing, and endurance. For now, you simply remain beneath the African evening. The stars begin emerging above the grasslands, and somewhere nearby, one of humanity's greatest survivors quietly takes another step. Section 2. The figure from the fading grassland keeps walking, and now you begin to notice how unusual that simple movement really is. Each step appears calm and economical. The heel touches first, the body passes forward, and the toes push lightly from the ground. Nothing about the rhythm looks dramatic. That is exactly why it matters. Nearly 2 million years ago, the human body was being remodeled into something capable of traveling far beyond the familiar territories of earlier ancestors. You follow several individuals across open ground while the morning sun rises behind distant hills. Cool air still rests close to the earth. Moisture clings to scattered leaves and your feet disturb the sharp smell of damp soil beneath dry grass. Small insects buzz near your ankles. Ahead, the group maintains a steady pace. Earlier hominins had already walked upright for millions of years, so Homo erectus did not suddenly invent bipedalism. Yet its body pushed upright, walking into a different category. The legs were proportionally longer than those of Australopithecines. The arms were relatively shorter. The overall body became taller and more linear. These changes reduced the ape-like proportions still visible in many earlier members of the human family. You can almost see evolution moving downward through the skeleton. The shoulders change. The ribcage changes. The pelvis changes. Then the legs lengthen beneath everything. Walking becomes increasingly central to daily existence. For animals moving through open landscapes, long legs provide several advantages. A longer stride covers more ground with fewer steps. That can reduce the energetic cost of traveling between scattered resources. Food may lie several kilometers away. Water may disappear seasonally. Carcasses attract competitors quickly. A mobile body becomes a valuable tool long before anyone manufactures something from stone. You watch an adult cross a shallow patch of uneven ground. The torso remains relatively stable above the hips. Muscles around the pelvis help prevent the body from collapsing sideways with each step. Your own anatomy performs the same quiet trick whenever you walk to another room. You rarely thank your gluteal muscles for civilization. Perhaps you should. The human pelvis must solve an awkward engineering problem. It supports upright walking while also forming the passage through which babies are born. Later humans developed even larger brains, increasing the difficulty of childbirth. In Homo erectus, this balance was already changing. The pelvis was adapted for regular terrestrial movement, yet researchers still debate exactly how childbirth and infant development worked. Some fossils suggest infants may have been relatively dependent after birth. Others caution that the available pelvic evidence remains too limited for confident conclusions. Bones survive. Parenting usually does not. Nearby, a younger individual moves more slowly through the grass. An adult waits before continuing. It is a tiny moment you cannot truly verify from archaeology. Yet cooperation would have been essential in any social primate raising immature offspring. Mobility becomes especially complicated when children cannot match adult pace. Perhaps groups sewed for them. Perhaps adults carried them. Perhaps different individuals helped provide food. There is no fossil-labeled, tired prehistoric parent carrying child for 3 kilometers. The absence feels like a serious gap in the record. You continue behind the group as the day warms. Heat rises visibly from bare patches of earth. Guert begins forming along your skin. Here another intriguing feature enters the story. Humans are unusually effective at losing heat through sweating. You have many eccrine sweat glands and relatively sparse body hair compared with other apes. Exactly when this combination became strongly developed remains uncertain. Scientists cannot excavate sweat glands from ancient sediment. Genetics, comparative anatomy, and ecological reconstruction offer clues, but not a precise moment. Still, a tall terrestrial, Homo erectus, living in warm, open habitats may have benefited greatly from improved cooling. That possibility connects to one of the more famous ideas about human evolution. Some researchers have proposed that early members of Homo practiced persistence hunting. Instead of outrunning animals through explosive speed, hunters might have followed prey repeatedly during hot conditions. Humans could potentially cool themselves while certain quadrupeds needed pauses to avoid overheating. Eventually, exhausted prey might become vulnerable. It is an appealing story, perhaps a little too appealing. Evidence that modern persistence hunting occurs in some societies does not prove Homo erectus regularly used the method. Researchers disagree over how important endurance running truly was in early human evolution. Anatomical features support efficient, long-distance locomotion, but whether they evolved specifically for running remains debate. Walking alone can explain much, and walking is what you see now. Hour after hour movement accumulates. No heroic sprint is required. The landscape itself rewards patience. The feet beneath these ancient travelers also reveal important changes. Earlier hominins had already lost the grasping big toe used by arboreal apes. By the time of later members of Homo, the foot was increasingly organized for efficient forward movement. An arch helps store and release energy during each step. Shorter toes reduce mechanical demands during running and walking. Again, the exact timing varies across fossils. Evolution rarely arrives as a complete package. It behaves more like someone gradually replacing pieces of an old machine, while the machine remains in constant use. The hands, meanwhile, are becoming less essential for locomotion. That frees them for carrying. Food can be transported. Stone tools can move between locations. Children can be held. Useful objects can accompany a group instead of being abandoned whenever movement begins. Carrying may sound ordinary, but it transforms how resources are shared across space. A stone collected near one river could be used kilometers away. Meat obtained at one place could potentially reach companions elsewhere. The hand axe you will encounter later only becomes truly meaningful when combined with a body capable of transporting it. You reach a low ridge around midday. Wind moves across your face, offering brief relief from the heat. From here, the land stretches outward in pale green and yellow bands. Tree cover thickens around watercourses. Beyond them, darker hills rise into haze. A group restricted to a tiny territory would be vulnerable whenever local conditions failed. A group able to travel farther possesses choices. That flexibility may help explain the geographical success of early Homo erectus. It also raises another question. Was this body shaped by open grasslands? For decades, human evolution was often described through a simple savanna hypothesis. Forests supposedly retreated, grasslands expanded, and upright humans adapted to increasingly open country. Modern research paints a less tidy picture. Early humans lived in mosaics containing woodland, grassland, lake shores, river margins, and changing combinations of habitats. Climate shifted repeatedly. Vegetation could transform within relatively short geological periods. There was no single endless savanna waiting politely for humanity to evolve. The quirky detail is that instability itself may have been useful. Some researchers emphasize variability rather than one particular habitat. If environments changed constantly, flexible individuals gained advantages over highly specialized ones. Low legs could work in grassland. They could also carry you between woodland patches. Efficient travel helps whether the destination is a carcass fruiting trees, water, or safer ground. You descend from the ridge behind the group. Stone crunches softly underfoot. A warm breeze carries the smell of dry vegetation and distant water. One individual bends briefly to inspect something beside the path, then straightens again. The others continue without urgency. You begin understanding that the success of Homo erectus may not have depended upon one revolutionary invention. Its body itself was already a survival technology. Height offered a broader view across vegetation. New legs made distance less expensive. Free hands made carrying easier. Improved heat management may have expanded the hours available for movement. Social cooperation could reduce the costs of raising children and acquiring food. None of these traits guarantees survival alone. Together, however, they produce something powerful. A traveler, and traveling changes everything. Far beyond the horizon lies territory no earlier human population had permanently occupied. Mountain corridors lead northward. River systems create natural pathways. Grasslands open and close as climates shift. Generations will follow animals, water, edible plants, and perhaps one another into places their ancestors never knew. No individual wakes one morning and decides to migrate out of Africa. There is no prehistoric community meeting. Instead, a home range shifts slowly. Then another generation moves farther. Children grow up beyond the landscapes known by their grandparents. Over centuries, those small movements become enormous distances. You glance back toward the ridge. The African horizon already seems farther away. Soon fossils will appear in a place called Dmanisi deep within the Caucasus. Their skulls will be smaller and stranger than many people expect. They will force future scientists to reconsider how much brainpower a human truly needed to leave Africa. But before you reach those cold hills, you keep following the footsteps ahead. They are steady, they are quiet, and they are beginning to point toward the rest of the world. Section 3. The African horizon does not disappear in a single dramatic moment. It fades slowly behind generations. A family moves along a river valley because water has become unreliable farther south. Their children grow up beside unfamiliar hills. Those children later follow grazing animals toward another valley, perhaps only a few days beyond the territory their parents knew. Nobody thinks of this as leaving a continent. There are no borders to cross. No maps exist. Even the idea of Africa and Eurasia would be meaningless to the people walking beneath this enormous sky. Yet something extraordinary is happening. Humans are beginning to leave Africa. You follow their imagined route northward through landscapes that change almost imperceptibly around you. Dry grass gives way to patches of woodland. River corridors cut through open country. The air becomes cooler during certain seasons, especially after sunset. Under your feet, dark stone appears among gravel and exposed soil. Some pieces fracture sharply when struck. That matters immediately. Early human movement was probably connected not only to food and water, but also to useful stone. A group discovering reliable raw material might return repeatedly. They could carry selected pieces onward. Perhaps knowledge of certain places survived through memory and social learning. No signposts were necessary. A familiar bend in a river might be enough. You hear stones knocking together somewhere ahead. One individual sits near exposed rock and strikes a cobble against another stone. A flake snaps away with a crisp sound. Its new edge is sharper than anything naturally growing from the body. This traveller is not carrying the elaborate hand axes you will examine later. Some of the earliest humans outside Africa appear associated with simpler stone technologies. Cores are struck to remove usable flakes. Edges can cut flesh, plants, hide, or other materials. The toolkit looks modest, but modest tools can travel remarkably far. That becomes obvious when you reach the Caucasus. Around 1 to 8 million years ago, ancient humans lived at Dmanisi in what is now Georgia. The site is one of the most important windows into the earliest known human dispersals beyond Africa, and it delivers an inconvenient surprise. The people here did not possess enormous brains. Some Dmanisi skulls had brain volumes little larger than those of much earlier members of the human family. Their bodies were also relatively small compared with later classic Homo erectus populations. For years, many researchers assumed a large brain and sophisticated Acheulean technology might have been necessary before humans could expand far beyond Africa. Dmanisi quietly ruined that tidy expectation. Apparently you can travel remarkably far without first becoming a genius. This may be comforting. You climb toward the ancient site through a cooler landscape. Today Dmanisi overlooks deep valleys cut by rivers. Nearly 2 million years ago, the surroundings were different, but the region still formed part of an important ecological corridor. Animals moved through this wider zone. Humans could move with them. The Caucasus sits between major land masses, making it an obvious pathway when viewed on a modern map. Of course, the ancient travellers never saw the map. They experienced valleys, ridges, water-prey weather, and whatever lay beyond the next rise. Migration was probably not a destination. It was accumulated movement. The smell of damp soil grows stronger as evening approaches. Clouds gather above the hills. Wind brushes cold against your face. This is not the equatorial warmth you left behind. Even relatively mild seasonal cold would have demanded adjustments. Shelter mattered more. Finding food changed with the seasons. Plant resources varied. Animals behaved differently. Some scholars have wondered whether early dispersing humans relied heavily on scavenging opportunities created by carnivores. Others emphasize active hunting, flexible gathering, or combinations that change from place to place. The evidence refuses to give you one simple answer. That is becoming a pattern. At Dmanisi, the ancient inhabitants shared the landscape with large carnivores. Their bones appear within sediments containing many animal remains. Big cats, hyenas, and other predators belong to the same ecosystem. You can imagine humans listening carefully after dark. A distant growl carries differently through cool air than across open African grassland. Every unfamiliar sound demands attention, yet the people remained here long enough to leave multiple individuals behind. 5 remarkably different skulls eventually emerged from the site. Their differences became one of paleoanthropology's favorite arguments. One skull was especially small. Another possessed a larger face and heavier structure. When researchers compared them, the variation seemed substantial enough that similar fossils found separately might once have received different species names. This raised an awkward possibility. Perhaps early Homo was more variable than scientists had assumed. Maybe some fossils classified into several species actually belonged to one diverse lineage. Or perhaps Dmanisi genuinely preserves multiple closely related forms. Researchers still disagree about how broadly those conclusions should be applied. The dead remain wonderfully uncooperative taxonomists. They refuse to organize themselves into convenient museum drawers. You move closer to one reconstructed individual. The face is unfamiliar but expressive. The brow is pronounced. The forehead slopes backward. The jaw lacks a modern chin. Yet the eyes track movement around the group in ways that immediately feel social. Another individual nearby is older. This person introduces one of Dmanisi's strangest and most touching discoveries. A famous skull from the site belonged to an elderly individual who had lost most teeth long before death. The tooth sockets had begun healing. That means this person survived for some time while barely able to chew normally. How? Perhaps softer foods were available naturally. Perhaps tools helped process meals. Perhaps companions shared prepared food. You cannot prove kindness from a toothless jaw. Still, prolonged survival invites the possibility of social assistance. This is one of those tiny prehistoric details that feels unexpectedly intimate. Someone who struggles to chew kept living. Someone may have waited. Someone may have shared. The wind becomes stronger across the ridge. You pull your imagined covering closer. although exactly what clothing these humans used remains unknown. Hide and plant materials rarely survive from such ancient periods. Researchers cannot say with confidence whether Dmanisi people wore deliberately constructed clothing. Simple wrapping or temporary protection is possible. Complete tailored garments belong much later, so you should not picture neat prehistoric coats with matching accessories. Evolutionary travel was apparently conducted without a fashion department. The more serious question is how these humans tolerated cooler conditions. Body hair may still have provided some protection. Seasonal movement could reduce exposure. Natural shelters may have helped. Fire would seem useful, but convincing evidence of habitual controlled fire at this early date remains controversial. You cannot simply place a cheerful campfire at Dmanisi because it makes the scene cozy. The archaeological record does not grant that luxury. Instead, darkness falls naturally. The temperature slips lower and lower. People draw closer together because bodies themselves produce warmth. Perhaps that simple behavior mattered. You listen to breathing nearby. Pebbles shift when someone changes position. A child presses against an adult. No language you can understand reaches your ears, although some form of vocal communication must have structured group life. How complex was it? Nobody knows. The vocal anatomy of early Homo erectus remains difficult to reconstruct. Some researchers argue that increasingly sophisticated cooperation would have benefited from richer communication. Others warn that social complexity does not automatically prove anything resembling modern speech. The answer vanished with voices that left no fossils. Morning brings movement again. The group follows descending terrain toward another water source. One person carries stone, another carries food. A younger individual shadows an experience an adult. You'll begin recognizing the hidden mechanism behind this extraordinary dispersal. There is no single heroic explorer. There are thousands of ordinary journeys. A dry season pushes one group farther. Growing populations divide. Animals shift their ranges. New water sources become familiar. Old camps are abandoned. Generation follows generation. Eventually humans occupy land their distant ancestors never encountered. And the most remarkable part is how early this happened. Within only a relatively short time after the appearance of early Homo erectus, or closely related humans in Africa, populations had reached the Caucasus. Later evidence will carry the story much farther east, across Western Asia, across vast stretches of the continent, eventually toward China and the islands of Southeast Asia. You pass above the Dmanisi valleys before following them onward. The air smells of wet stone and grass. Far below, water moves between dark slopes. Africa lies somewhere behind you, invisible beyond countless ridges. Ahead waits an almost unimaginable continent. The travellers do not know its size. They only know that another valley opens beyond the hill. So they walk toward it, and slowly, almost casually, the human world becomes much larger. Section 4. You remain in the Caucasus a little longer because Dmanisi refuses to let you leave quietly. The morning mist hangs low above the valleys, softening the dark slopes beyond the ancient settlement. Cold moisture gathers on exposed stone as your scum to expunten. Your breath feels sharper here than it did beneath the warmer African sky. Nearby ravens circle above broken terrain while wind slips through grasses with a faint restless hiss. At first glance, this place seems almost too ordinary to rewrite human history. There are no monumental structures, no carefully arranged burials wait beneath the soil. No carved symbols announce that something important happened here. Instead, the evidence lies in fragments. Teeth, animal bones, simple stone tools, and several human skulls that refuse to behave as neatly as scientists might prefer. You crouch beside the ground where future excavators will uncover them. The sediments beneath you accumulated roughly 1.8 million years ago, preserving one of the earliest secure records of humans living beyond Africa. That alone would make Dmanisi famous. But the individuals found here complicate almost every comfortable assumption about early human expansion. You picture 5 faces appearing slowly from the earth. They do not look identical. One skull is tall and lightly built. Another has a much broader face. Some possess stronger brow ridges. Their jaws differ. Their brain cases vary considerably in shape and volume. If these fossils had been discovered thousands of kilometers apart, researchers might have been tempted to assign several of them to separate species. Here, however, they came from the same general place and geological period. That changes the argument. Perhaps early humans simply varied more than previously imagined. Modern people do, after all. Walk through any airport today and you will see extraordinary variation within one species. Faces differ, body size differs, skull shape differs, yet everyone remains unmistakably human. Dmanisi raises the possibility that paleoanthropologists sometimes underestimated similar variation among ancient populations. That possibility sounds simple. It is not. Species are difficult to define when your evidence consists mainly of bones separated by hundreds of thousands of years. Living animals allow scientists to observe reproduction behavior, genetics, and population boundaries. Fossils allow you to stare very carefully at a jaw. The jaw does not answer questions. This has produced long-running debates over whether early African and Eurasian forms should be divided into Homo habilis, Homo ergaster, Homo erectus, and perhaps additional species. Some researchers prefer a broad interpretation. They see considerable diversity within an evolving early Homo lineage. Others argue that anatomical differences reveal multiple distinct species with separate evolutionary histories. The disagreement remains unresolved. You can almost hear future conference rooms becoming tense. Fortunately tonight, the valley is much quieter. You turn away from taxonomy and watch the living group instead. A young adult sits beside a scatter of stones. The tools here are relatively simple compared with the beautifully shaped hand axes that appear elsewhere. Cobble cores are struck repeatedly to remove sharp flakes. Some flakes remain irregular. That does not make them useless. A sharp edge can slice animal tissue. It can scrape plant material. It can help process hide or wood. Simple technology does not necessarily mean simple behavior. People usually make tools appropriate to the problem before them. Nobody needs a masterpiece to cut dinner. This matters because the Dmanisi inhabitants seem to have expanded beyond Africa without the later Acheulean hand axe tradition. Their dispersal therefore challenges the idea that one major technological breakthrough opened the door to Eurasia. Perhaps the door was never locked. Mobility, social cooperation, flexible diets, and basic stone tools may have been enough. You hear a hard crack from beside the group. A stone flake separates cleanly from its core. Someone turns it in the hand, examining the edge. The stone feels cold when you imagine touching it. Fine dust clings to the fingers. Then the tool disappears into daily activity. Nothing ceremonial occurs. That ordinary moment may be closer to technological reality than dramatic scenes of prehistoric invention. Knowledge probably moved through watching. Youngsters could observe older individuals choosing stone and striking angles. Repeated practice would slowly improve skill. Whether formal teaching occurred remains uncertain. Researchers still debate how much deliberate instruction early humans used when passing technological knowledge between generations. Imitation may have been sufficient for simple tools, yet even imitation requires attention. You must notice what another person does. You must remember. You must try again. Nearby, the older toothless individual rests in the weak sunlight. This fossil remains one of Dmanisi's most memorable discoveries. Most teeth were gone long before death, and the jawbone had remodeled around empty sockets. The individual survived after serious tooth loss. That simple fact opened several possibilities. Perhaps naturally soft foods formed enough of the diet. Perhaps meat was cut into smaller pieces. Perhaps plants were crushed before eating. Or companions may have shared food requiring little chewing. You cannot determine which explanation is correct. Still, survival suggests adaptation. It may also suggest tolerance toward a group member who no longer ate easily. That is where archaeology approaches an emotional boundary. You want to imagine compassion. Perhaps compassion truly existed. Social mammals commonly show attachment and caregiving behavior, but scientists must remain careful. Healing proves survival, not motive. The fossil preserves endurance. The relationship behind that endurance is gone. A breeze carries the smell of wet earth down the slope. You hear movement farther away. Large carnivores also inhabited this landscape, and Dmanisi preserves an impressive community of mammals. Saber-toothed cats, hyenas, wolves, and other predators occupied overlapping territories. Humans were part of that ecological network, not masters standing above it. They could process carcasses. They could probably defend valuable food in certain situations. They could also become vulnerable when alone. This makes group awareness important. One person scans the open ground while another works. Perhaps that division is accidental. Perhaps it is cooperative vigilance. You cannot know. But a group containing adults and younger individuals must coordinate movement somehow. Everyone wandering independently would be an excellent strategy for feeding local carnivores. Not ideal. Another intriguing question concerns why so many remains accumulated at Dmanisi. The ancient landscape included natural depressions and geological features capable of trapping or collecting animals. Some researchers have examined whether individuals fell into cavities or whether carnivore activity contributed to the bone assemblage. Site formation is rarely straightforward. A fossil deposit is not a frozen photograph. It's more like a room repeatedly rearranged by water sediment, predators, decay, and time. That uncertainty shapes every reconstruction you make. Perhaps the people you imagine together never stood together at all. Their remains may represent different moments within a broader period of occupation. Your mind naturally creates one evening around one camp. Geology is less sentimental. Still, the population represented here tells you something powerful. Early humans reached the Caucasus while retaining relatively small brains and fairly basic stone technology. They adapted to landscapes different from tropical Africa. They lived among unfamiliar animals. They survived seasonal conditions that could become colder. And they did all this astonishingly early. The brain sizes at D. manisi deserve special attention. Some fall around the range of roughly 600 to 700 cubic centimeters, although individual estimates vary. That is far below the average modern human brain. It is also smaller than many later Homo erectus examples from Asia. So the earliest outward expansion of humans did not wait for modern-sized intelligence. Bigger brains would come later. Geographical ambition arrived first. This is one of de Manisi's quiet lessons. Evolution does not move according to a checklist. Long legs do not wait politely for larger brains. Migration does not wait for prettier tools. Different traits change at different rates. Natural selection has never shown much interest in keeping textbooks tidy. Late afternoon settles over the hills. You watch shadows lengthen across the uneven ground. A youngster turns a discarded flake between small fingers. An adult rises and looks toward the descending valley. Tomorrow, perhaps the group will travel farther. Perhaps they will return to familiar water. Perhaps another generation will move beyond the next ridge entirely. Their fossils cannot tell you. But de Manisi has already shown you enough. The first humans beyond Africa did not need to resemble you very closely. They needed only to remain adaptable enough to keep going. Ahead lies a continent larger than anything they can imagine. Eastward environments will change again. Mountain corridors will open into enormous plains. Rivers will guide movement through unfamiliar country. Eventually traces of ancient humans will appear thousands of kilometers away. You take one final look across the Caucasian valley. Mist gathers again below. The de Manisi people become silhouettes against the fading light. Then you follow the path east. Section 5. The path east from the Caucasus does not feel like a road. It feels like a widening world. You move through valleys where dry grass bends beneath a pale morning wind, then into lower country where rivers spread across broad floodplain. The air becomes warmer again. Dust settles or skin. Somewhere nearby, hoofed animals splash through shallow water before disappearing behind reeds. For the small human groups moving across this immense continent, Asia is not a destination. It is simply the next landscape, and then the next, and then another beyond that. Over many generations, descendants of early Homo erectus and closely related populations spread across an extraordinary geographical range. Fossils eventually appear in East Asia. Other populations reach Southeast Asia. By the time you follow their story far enough, humans are living thousands of kilometers from the African environments where their deeper ancestry began. There was no single migration wave. No leader marched east with everyone following behind. Instead, movement likely happened repeatedly. Populations expanded when climates permitted. They withdrew when conditions became difficult. Some groups may have become isolated. Others probably mixed with neighboring populations. The human map kept changing. You walk across a broad plain as a distant thunder rolls behind a line of low hills. Warm rain begins falling in heavy drops. The smell of wet soil rises immediately. Your clothing, whatever form you imagine it taking here, clings damply against your skin. Nearby a group shelters beneath trees until the worst rain passes. Then movement resumes. That flexibility becomes one of the most important themes in their survival. Asia offered no single environment. Western regions included dry grasslands, open woodland, and steppe-like country. Farther east, monsoon systems shaped seasonal rainfall. Northern zones could become sharply colder. Southern regions remained humid and tropical. A human lineage capable of surviving across such diversity was doing something remarkable. It was not merely enduring one favoured habitat. It was learning how to live with change. I begin to understand why long-distance expansion may have depended more on adaptability than brilliance. A group does not need to predict the next 1,000 years. It only needs to solve today's problems. Where is water? Which plants are edible now? Which animals are moving through the valley? Where can stone be found? Which route avoids dangerous ground? Repeated for generations, those simple questions can carry a species across a continent. Stone tools travel with the story. In some regions, early humans continued using relatively simple core and flake technologies. Elsewhere, Herculean hand axes became common. This uneven distribution puzzled archaeologists for decades. The famous archaeologist Hallam Movius once proposed a broad dividing line across Asia. West of what became known as the Movius Line, hand axes were much more common. East of it, many sites seemed dominated by simpler chopping tools and flakes. For a time, researchers wondered whether Eastern populations lacked the technological tradition found farther west. Reality turned out to be less tidy. Acheulean-like tools have since been found at several East Asian sites, complicating the old boundary. Perhaps traditions spread unevenly. Perhaps available raw materials influenced tool design. Perhaps different groups simply solved similar problems differently. Archaeologists still disagree about how much the apparent divide reflects culture, environment, preservation, or incomplete discovery. Stone can be stubborn evidence. It survives beautifully while explaining very little about the person who held it. You cross another river. Cold water presses against your ankles. Rounded cobbles shift beneath your feet with each careful step. One traveller pauses to pick up a stone, tests its weight, then drops it. Another keeps a darker piece and carries it forward. That tiny decision contains knowledge. Not every rock fractures well. Some produce sharper edges. Some break unpredictably. Learning which materials are useful may have required repeated experience with local geology. Now imagine doing that across unfamiliar territory. The landscape changes. The stone changes. The animals change. Even the seasons begin behaving differently. Yet the humans continue. Farther east, the great river systems of Asia would have created natural movement corridors. Valleys concentrate water plants, prey, and expose sediments. They also provide routes through otherwise difficult terrain. You can imagine generations following these rivers without knowing how far they lead. Children learn one stretch. Their descendants learn another. Eventually, the remembered world expands beyond anything one lifetime could explore. The quietness of that process makes it easy to underestimate. Nobody announces the conquest of Asia. There is only repeated walking. Still, expansion carried risks. Small populations are vulnerable. A few bad seasons can reduce numbers sharply. Disease, accidents, drought, or lost access to food can isolate a group. If neighbouring populations remain distant, recovery becomes difficult. This may have produced repeated local extinctions, followed by recolonization. The archaeological record often looks patchy for exactly this reason. A human presence appears, then disappears. Later humans appear again. Were they descendants of the same population? Did newcomers arrive from elsewhere? In many places, researchers cannot yet say. That uncertainty prevents you from imagining one unbroken eastward march. The real story was probably messy. Climate helped create that mess. Throughout the Pleistocene, Earth's climate shifted again and again. Glacial cycles altered temperature and rainfall. Grasslands expanded in some periods and contracted in others. Forests advanced, fragmented, and returned. Coastlines moved as sea levels rose and fell. Habitats suitable for humans sometimes connected widely separated regions. At other times, those corridors narrowed or vanished. A population that seemed secure for several generations could suddenly face a transformed landscape. You feel the change as evening approaches. The day has been humid, but wind now arrives from higher country. It carries a cooler edge. Insects quiet. A bank of clouds turns purple beneath the lowering sun. The people around you begin seeking a place to stop. One adult checks the ground beneath a rocky overhang. Another gathers objects left nearby. The group's movements suggest familiarity. Perhaps they have used this place before. Repeated camps would make practical sense. Safe water, shelter, and stone are worth remembering. Memory may therefore have become another invisible survival tool. Not written memory. Landscape memory. A distinctive tree. A bend in a stream. A dark cliff. A hill shaped like a sleeping animal. Such landmarks can anchor an entire mental map. Researchers cannot recover those maps from fossil skulls. Yet long-range mobility implies that humans possessed some capacity to navigate recurring territories. How sophisticated that ability was remains open to debate. The quirky part is that even modern hunter-gatherers can maintain extraordinarily detailed geographical knowledge without formal maps. Ancient humans may have done something similar at a simpler scale. You sit beneath the overhang as light fades. Water drips steadily from one corner of the rock. The stone behind your back feels cool and rough. Smoke is absent because secure evidence for habitual fire remains uncertain at many early sites. Darkness therefore arrives completely. No amber glow pushes it away. The night simply closes around the group. Yet these humans have already accomplished something astonishing. They are no longer confined to one ecological zone. They are stretching into a continent of deserts, forests, grasslands, rivers, mountains, and tropical coasts. Later, their descendants or close relatives will leave some of the most famous fossils ever discovered. Peking man will emerge from northern China. Java man will transform scientific debates in Southeast Asia. Those discoveries lie ahead. For now, they are still only travellers beneath a vast Eurasian sky. You listen to distant water. Someone shifts beside you. Far beyond the darkness, the land continues east for thousands of kilometres. The people here cannot imagine where it ends. They only know that tomorrow offers another horizon. and once again they will walk toward it. Section 6. By morning the rain has passed, leaving the ground dark and heavy beneath your feet. Water gathers inside shallow depressions between stones. The air smells clean, almost metallic, with the faint scent of wet grass rising from the valley floor. Head one member of the group stops beside an exposed bank of stone. Nothing about the place looks important. There is no workshop building, no marked quarry, and certainly no convenient prehistoric hardware store. Yet the traveller crouches and begins searching carefully. One stone is lifted, turned, and rejected. Another is tested against the palm. Then a dense piece of rock is chosen and carried toward a flatter patch of ground. You are about to watch one of the longest-lasting technologies in human history take shape. The first blow is hard. Stone strikes stone with a dry crack that echoes briefly against the nearby slope. A large flake breaks away. The toolmaker rotates the core and strikes again. Another fragment falls. Then another. Slowly something recognizable begins emerging. The object becomes thinner. Its edges become more regular. The outline narrows toward one end. You are watching the creation of an Herculean hand axe. Hand axes first appeared in Africa more than 1.7 million years ago, although their exact beginnings remain debated. They later spread across large areas inhabited by Homo erectus and other ancient humans. Some remained roughly oval, others became pointed. Many were shaped on both sides, producing the term biface used by archaeologists today. You pick up an imaginary finished example. It feels heavy but balanced. Its surface carries dozens of scars where flakes were deliberately removed. The edge can cut. The pointed end can pierce or separate material. The broader portion provides weight and a firm grip. It is simple. It is also remarkably effective. A hand axe could help butcher an animal. It could cut hide. It might chop plant material or wood. Some examples may have been useful for digging. Researchers have proposed many additional functions because ancient owners inconveniently neglected to attach instruction manuals. Microscopic wear sometimes helps interviews. Experimental archaeology helps as well. Modern researchers reproduce tools and test what they can accomplish. But no single purpose explains every hand axe. The best interpretation may be the least glamorous. It was versatile. That versatility becomes important when you consider how long the tradition lasted. Herculean tools continued appearing for well over 1 million years. Think about that slowly. Modern technology transforms within decades. A device that feels advanced today may look strangely outdated before you finish paying for it. The hand axe survived through countless generations. Landscapes changed. Human populations shifted. Climate cycles came and went. Still people kept making these stone form. That longevity sometimes led earlier researchers to describe Herculean culture as static. If the same general tool remained useful for so long, perhaps the humans making it were mentally conservative. That interpretation is probably too simple. Hand axes varied across time and geography. Some were crude and thick. Others were carefully symmetrical. Different stones required different techniques. Toolmakers adjusted size and shape according to material and likely purpose. A tradition can remain recognizable while still containing enormous flexibility. You watch the toolmaker turn the stone again. The next strike is more controlled. Instead of simply smashing away material, the person seems to anticipate where the flake will travel. Angle matters. Force matters. The shape created by the previous blow affects the next one. This is not random breaking. Stone fracture follows predictable physical rules, and skilled toolmaking requires learning those rules through experience. You can hear the rhythm. Strike. Turn. Examine. Strike again. Small flakes scatter across damp soil. One catches the morning light. Another lands near your foot with an edge sharp enough to slice skin easily. There is something peaceful about the repetition. It resembles careful craftwork more than dramatic survival. The sequence also raises an important question. How did this knowledge survive for hundreds of thousands of years? Genes do not directly encode the exact steps needed to make a hand axe. Each generation had to learn. Young individuals probably watched experienced toolmakers. Perhaps they copied movements. Perhaps adults demonstrated useful techniques. Researchers still argue over whether Herculean skill required deliberate teaching, complex language, or mostly imitation supported by repeated practice. Experiments suggest some methods are difficult to master without guidance, yet proving that Homo erectus taught intentionally remains impossible. You can see the stone. The lesson disappeared. A younger individual sits nearby and watches. The adult strikes again. The youngster picks up a discarded fragment and taps it against another stone. The gesture may be playful. It may be practice. With ancient humans, those categories could overlap. Learning often begins by copying behavior before understanding its purpose. That is true for modern children as well. The comparison does not mean their minds worked exactly like yours. Still, social learning almost certainly mattered. Otherwise complex stone traditions would struggle to persist across generations. There is another mystery hidden in the hand axe's symmetry. Some examples are astonishingly balanced. Their edges curve almost evenly around both sides. A few appear more carefully finished than strict function requires. Why? One possibility is simply craftsmanship. A skilled toolmaker might produce symmetry because controlled flaking naturally leads toward an organized shape. Another idea is that symmetrical tools were easier to use or resharpen. More speculative proposals suggest hand axes could also have served as social signals. Perhaps a finely made tool advertised skill coordination or patience. Some researchers have even compared them with displays used in courtship. That theory is intriguing. It is also difficult to prove. A beautifully symmetrical stone does not whisper, "I made this to impress someone." Archaeologists must remain patient. The object gives you form without intention. Still, there is something striking about certain giant hand axes discovered at ancient sites. Some are far larger than practical cutting tools need to be. These oversized examples have fueled a suggestion of display teaching, ritual behavior, or simple experimentation. Maybe someone simply enjoyed making an absurdly large hand axe. Even prehistory may have contained show-offs. You follow the group toward a place where food is being processed. The newly shaped tool is carried easily in one hand. That portability matters. A useful hand axe could travel from one location to another. Its edges could be sharpened again when dulled. More flakes could be removed until the object became smaller. Eventually it might be abandoned beside a carcass riverbank or temporary camp. Millions of years later, that discarded object would become evidence. Stone preserves decisions. The choice of raw material, the angle of a blow, the sequence of removals. Even mistakes remain frozen into its surface. That is why stone tools sometimes reveal behavior more clearly than bones. Skeletons tell you what a body could do. Tools show something a mind actually did. Yet the distribution of Herculean technology is not universal. As you move farther east, hand axes become less common in some regions. Earlier archaeologists treated this pattern as evidence of sharp cultural differences between Western and Eastern populations. Later discoveries complicated that picture, as hand axe-like technologies appeared in places once considered outside the tradition. Local stone availability may partly explain the variation. Large, good-quality rocks are easier to shape into bifaces than small cobbles or brittle material. Bamboo and wood may also have been important in some regions, although such organic tools rarely survive. This possibility creates a frustrating archaeological illusion. A society using mostly wood can appear technologically simple if only its stones remain. Preservation is biased. Stone is patient. Wood is not. The day grows warmer while the group continues working. The smell of fresh-cut plant fibers mixes with damp earth. You hear flies near food scraps and birds calling from trees farther uphill. The hand axe changes hands. Someone uses it briefly, then sets it beside a pile of material. No one admires it. No one places it inside a decorated case. It is simply useful. That may explain its extraordinary endurance better than anything else. The design survives because it works. It can be made from many kinds of stone. It can serve several tasks. It can be resharpened. Its production can be learned and copied. For a mobile human population facing unfamiliar environments, such reliability is valuable. You look at the object resting on the ground. 1 million years from now, humans will still make related forms. Different populations will inherit the basic idea, modify it, and carry it across immense distances. Few technologies in your own world remain recognizable for even a few centuries. This one persists across geological time. Soon, however, another ancient technology will become even more transformative. Stone can cut, but fire can change darkness itself. You lift your eyes toward the evening horizon. The air is beginning to cool. Somewhere in the distance, smoke may be rising. Whether the humans beside you control it yet is another question entirely. Section 7. The smoke on the horizon remains faint for several minutes. At first, you're not even sure it is real. A grey ribbon rises beyond low trees, bends beneath the evening wind, and disappears into the darkening sky. The group around you notices it too. Several heads turn. One individual stands and watches without moving closer. Fire is familiar to every animal living in this landscape. Lightning ignites dry grass. Volcanic activity can scorch entire regions. Dead branches catch flame during hot, windy seasons. To the humans beside you, fire may still belong partly to the world rather than fully to them. That distinction matters. Seeing fire is easy. Keeping it is harder. Creating it whenever you want is harder still. You move toward the smoky area after the flames have weakened. The ground smells sharp and bitter. Blackened grass crumbles beneath your feet. Warm ash rises in tiny clouds whenever someone steps too heavily. The heat has transformed the landscape within hours. Some insects have vanished. Seeds lie exposed. Small animals may have been trapped or killed. Branches that were difficult to break are now brittle. Fire destroys. But fire also reveals opportunities. This may have been one of humanity's earliest lessons. Long before humans understood combustion, they could observe what flames did to food and landscape. A burned carcass smells different. Tubers soften when heated. Wood hardens or changes texture near flame. Predators behave cautiously around active fire. The night itself feels less absolute when something bright pushes against darkness. You can easily imagine why ancient humans became interested. The difficulty is proving when that interest turned into control. Archaeologists have searched for early fire at sites across Africa and Eurasia. Burned bones, reddened sediment, charcoal and heated stone can all suggest ancient flames. Unfortunately, natural fires produce many of the same traces. A burned patch beside human tools is suggestive. It is not always decisive. Researchers still debate which early sites preserve genuine controlled fire rather than accidental burning. Claims extend deep into the early Pleistocene, but the evidence becomes stronger much later. Some sites around 1 million years ago are often discussed as possible examples of repeated human fire use. More convincing evidence for habitual control appears later still. The timeline refuses to offer one clean invention date. There was probably no single evening when humanity suddenly discovered fire. That makes too good a story. Reality may have been slower. Perhaps groups first used naturally occurring flames. A burning branch could be carried away. Smouldering material might be preserved overnight. People may have learned to feed small fires with dry wood before they learned reliable ignition. If flame died, they could lose it completely until nature provided another source. You watch one individual approach a patch where a branch still glows red beneath ash. The person does not grab it carelessly. Even without scientific knowledge, pain teaches quickly. A stick is used instead. The ember rolls free. Thin smoke curls upward. Another person places dry grass nearby. Nothing happens for several seconds. Then a small yellow flame appears. It trembles in the wind. Everyone keeps a little distance. You cannot know whether such a scene occurred this early, but it captures the uncertainty well. Control may have begun with maintenance rather than creation. Keeping fire alive requires attention. Tension. Someone must gather fuel. Someone must avoid letting sparks escape into dry vegetation. Someone must notice when embers weaken. That creates a new kind of responsibility inside the group. The fire needs care, and in return it changes almost everything. Night becomes warmer. The smell of smoke clings to hair and to skin. Dry wood cracks softly. Orange light flickers across faces that previously disappeared into darkness. Nearby animals may hesitate before approaching. Not every predator fears fire equally, but flame can still create a psychological and physical barrier. Even insects may become less troublesome in smoky air. That alone might make a campsite feel luxurious. Prehistoric luxury standards were modest. The greatest transformation may involve food. Cooking changes texture. It softens tough plant tissues. It makes meat easier to chew. Heat can increase access to calories in some foods and reduce certain pathogens or toxins. For a species with changing teeth jaws and digestive demands, that matters enormously. One influential idea argues that cooking helped support the evolution of larger brains and smaller guts. The hypothesis is associated especially with the idea that cooked food provides more usable energy than raw food. It is elegant. It is also controversial. The major anatomical changes linked with early Homo erectus may predate firm evidence for habitual cooking. That timing problem keeps the debate alive. Perhaps cooking was important early. Perhaps changes in diet and food processing began before regular fire control. Stone tools alone could slice meat and crush plant foods. Researchers continue arguing about how tightly cooking should be linked to the emergence of Homo erectus. You smell something sweeter near the edge of the burned ground. A plant root has been exposed and partly roasted by the fire. Its surface is blackened. Inside the tissue is softer. One traveler breaks it open. Steam escapes. The experience of discovering naturally cooked food could have happened countless times before deliberate cooking became normal. That is a wonderfully simple path toward experimentation. Eat something after fire. Notice the difference. Remember. Try again. Human innovation often begins with accidents that someone decides not to ignore. Fire also changes time. Without it, useful daylight ends quickly after sunset. With it, social activity can continue. People can sit together after dark. Tools can be repaired. Food can be shared. Children can remain close to adults. Vocal interaction can continue beyond the practical demands of daytime movement. Some researchers have suggested that firelight may have encouraged more complex evening communication. Storytelling, planning, and social bonding become tempting possibilities. But here you must be careful again. You cannot hear ancient conversations. A hearth does not preserve grammar. The existence of nighttime fire does not prove stories were told around it. Still extended social hours create possibilities that darkness alone restricts. You sit near the imagined flames. Heat touches one side of your face while cool night air presses against the other. Smoke catches in your throat. The smell enters everything. Someone places a thicker branch across the coals. A child watches the sparks jump upward. The scene feels deeply human. That feeling can be misleading. You naturally project familiar emotions onto ancient people because fire remains emotionally powerful today. Comfort, safety, home, companionship. Those associations may be ancient, but exactly how ancient remains difficult to demonstrate. There is another peculiar clue involving caves. At several later sites, repeated burning occurs in specific areas rather than randomly scattered across sediments. That pattern can suggest deliberate hearth placement. People may have preferred certain corners for fire because smoke escaped more easily, or wind remained weaker. Once habitual fire becomes established, campsites begin acquiring structure. There is a place for flame, a place for work, perhaps a place for sleeping. Domestic space begins to emerge in faint archaeological shadows. You are still far from houses, yet organization itself matters. Fire may even influence geography. Cold regions become easier to occupy if groups can produce reliable warmth. Winter nights become less dangerous. Foods unavailable raw can become usable. Wooden tools can be hardened or modified. Smoke may preserve food for longer periods, although direct evidence for early smoking remains uncertain. Each benefit expands the range of environments humans might tolerate. That could help explain later movement into cooler areas of Eurasia. But timing matters again. Early populations reached places such as Dmanisi before we possess strong evidence for routine fire there. So fire was probably not required for the first movement beyond Africa. Humans were already surprisingly flexible. Fire later made flexibility even greater. The flames in front of you sink gradually. Bright yellow becomes deep orange. Orange becomes red. One adult pushes ash over glowing embers. Perhaps the goal is to preserve them until morning. Perhaps the action is accidental. You cannot know. That uncertainty follows you through nearly every part of early human history. The farther back you travel, the more careful imagination must become. Still, the night feels different now. You have seen how one force of nature could become a tool without ever becoming truly tame. Fire gives warmth, then burns. It protects, then spreads. It cooks food, then consumes fuel constantly. Humans must cooperate with it rather than command it completely. That may be why it becomes so powerful. The final glow fades beneath ash. Darkness returns around the camp, but it no longer feels quite as ancient as before. Something has changed. Humans have begun learning that the environment itself can be transformed. Soon you will follow that lesson into food because survival depends not only on where you walk or what tools you carry. It also depends on what you can eat. And Homo erectus may have survived so long because dinner was never just one thing. Section 8. Morning arrives with hunger before anything else. The ash from last night's fire. If such a fire was truly kept here, lies grey and silent beneath the cool air. Around you the camp begins to stir. Someone stretches. A child brushes dust from one leg. Another person checks a stone edge with a thumb, careful enough not to cut the skin. Then the group begins moving. There is no breakfast table waiting beyond the trees. Food must be found again. That simple fact shapes nearly every hour of life for Homo erectus. You follow the group across ground still damp from overnight moisture. The air carries the smell of grass soil and animal dung. Birds call from scattered trees. Farther away, something large moves through reeds with a heavy rustling sound. Everyone notices. Nobody rushes. Food in this world comes from many directions. That variety may have been one of the greatest strengths of early humans. Meat mattered, but meat was never the entire menu. Plants mattered too. Roots, tubers, fruits, seeds, leaves, nuts, and perhaps underground storage organs could all contribute calories when available. Exactly which plants were eaten depended on place and season. Most disappear completely from the archaeological record. A stone tool survives for 1,000,000 years. A soft berry is less cooperative. This preservation problem once encouraged overly meat-heavy reconstructions of early human diets. Animal bones remain visible. Plant meals usually vanish. Modern methods have begun correcting that imbalance. Microscopic residues, dentalware isotopic studies, and experimental archaeology reveal increasingly complex diets among ancient humans. Still, the further back you travel, the burier the menu becomes. You stop beside a patch of disturbed soil. One adult uses a stick to loosen something below the surface. A thick root emerges. It looks unimpressive. That does not mean it is nutritionally unimportant. Underground foods can remain available when fruit becomes scarce. Some are rich in carbohydrates. Others contain fiber and defensive chemicals that make chewing unpleasant. Processing helps. Pounding helps. Cutting helps. Heat once reliably controlled helps even more. A flexible species does not ask whether dinner is glamorous. It asks whether dinner can keep walking tomorrow. The group moves toward open ground. Vultures circle high above a distant point that gets attention immediately. Scavenging has long played a major role in debates about early Homo. A concentration of birds may indicate a carcass, but reaching it first is another matter. Lions, hyenas, and other carnivores also understand the value of dead animals. You approach cautiously. The smell reaches you before the scene becomes visible. It is thick, sour, and unpleasant in the warming air. Flies gather heavily around the remains of a large herbivore. Much of the soft tissue has already disappeared. At first glance, there seems little worth taking. Then a tool strikes bone. This is where humans possess an advantage. Loom bones contain marrow. Marrow is dense in fat and energy. A carcass that appears nearly finished to many animals may still contain valuable nutrition. Stone makes that hidden food accessible. You hear another hard impact. The bone cracks. Fragments scatter. Inside pale fatty tissue becomes available. It is not elegant. It is efficient. Early archaeological sites preserve animal bones bearing cut marks and percussion damage consistent with butchery and marrow extraction that provides strong evidence that meat and animal fat belong to the diet of early Homo. The harder question is how those carcasses were acquired. Did humans kill the animals themselves? Did they scavenge after large predators? Did they sometimes steal fresh kills through coordinated intimidation? Probably all of these happened at different times and places. Researchers still disagree about the balance between active hunting and scavenging during the earliest stages of Homo erectus. The evidence supports some meat consumption more clearly than one universal method of obtaining it. You watch the group work quickly. Speed matters around a carcass. The smell carries far. Competitors may arrive. One individual cuts strips from tissue still attached near a joint. Another cracks smaller bones. A third remains upright, scanning the surrounding grass. The arrangement suggests cooperation, although you cannot know whether roles were formally assigned. Perhaps experience naturally shapes behavior. The best toolmaker cuts. The strongest person breaks bone. The most nervous person watches for hyenas. Every family has its talents. Soon the group leaves. Carrying changes the meal. Instead of consuming everything at the discovery site, some food can move elsewhere. This opens the possibility of sharing beyond the individuals who found it. Food sharing is a central feature of modern human societies, but its deep evolutionary roots are difficult to trace. Cut marks cannot tell you who received the meat. A concentration of bones at one location may indicate repeated processing. It may also result from water carnivores or geological disturbance. Scholars continue debating how organized food transport and sharing became among early humans. Still, a mobile social group benefits when calories can be moved toward children or companions unable to participate fully in acquisition. You return toward trees beside water. The shade feels cooler against your skin. Here the diet changes again. Several individuals search among branches and low vegetation. Small fruits are gathered. Seeds are examined. One tough object is struck against stone. The sound is softer than tool making, but equally deliberate. Hard foods leave traces on teeth over time. So do gritty particles from dust and soil. The teeth of early humans show wear patterns that can reveal broad dietary habits, though interpreting them is complicated. A tooth records what passed through the mouth. It does not provide a recipe. One particularly quirky possibility concerns insects. Termites, grubs, honey, and other small foods are widely consumed by modern primates and many human foraging societies. They are rich in nutrients and often seasonally abundant. Direct evidence for their importance to Homo erectus is scarce. Yet it would be surprising if opportunistic humans completely ignored such easy calories. You can imagine someone opening rotten wood and finding larvae. No spear is required. No heroic chase follows. Just lunch. That is an important correction to popular images of prehistoric life. Survival was probably built as much on unremarkable foods as dramatic hunting scenes. A successful group cannot rely on spectacular events every day. Large animals are dangerous and unpredictable. Plants wait quietly. Small animals hide nearby. Shellfish, eggs, insects, roots, nuts, and carrion can all become part of a broad strategy. The wider the menu, the less one failed resource becomes catastrophic. This dietary flexibility may have helped Homo erectus occupy radically different environments. A population in East Africa encountered different plants and prey than one living in Java. Northern populations face stronger seasonality. River corridors offered aquatic resources absent from dry uplands. The ability to exploit local opportunities mattered more than maintaining one fixed cuisine. You sit beside the water while the food is divided. There are no plates, no carefully arranged portion. A strip of tissue changes hands. A child receives something softer. Someone crushes plant material between stone surfaces. The The smells mix strangely damp vegetation, animal fat, sweat, mud, and perhaps smoke clinging faintly to skin. This is not a feast. It is enough. And enough may be one of the most important words in the history of survival. Evolution does not demand perfect meals. It rewards those who acquire sufficient energy often enough to reproduce and raise offspring. That sounds almost boring. But boring can survive for a very long time. The afternoon grows heavy with heat. Most movement slows. Digestion encourages rest. You lean against rough bark and listen to insects pulse in the grass. Nearby, one of the hand axes from yesterday lies beside a pile of food scraps. Its edge is stained from use. The tool, the long-legged body, the shared camp, and the broad diet now fit together. Mobility brings you to resources. Stone opens resources. Social groups help protect and distribute resources. Fire may eventually transform them. Each adaptation supports the others. That interconnected flexibility begins to explain why Homo erectus could endure across such immense stretches of time. The meal ends without ceremony. Soon the group will move again. Children will grow. Seasons will change. Some food sources will vanish while others appear. And across countless ordinary days like this one, the species will keep surviving. Section 9. By late afternoon, the group has stopped moving. There is no village ahead. No doorway opens beneath the roof, and no permanent wall protects anyone from the evening wind. Instead, the people gather near a shallow rise above the water, where scattered trees offer shade and a clear view of the surrounding ground. The place looks temporary. That may be exactly why it works. You lower yourself onto dry earth beside them and feel warmth still stored beneath the surface. Grass whispers softly whenever the breeze passes. The smell of crushed leaves mixes with mud from the nearby watercourse. Somewhere beyond the trees, an animal calls once and then becomes quiet. This is home tonight. Tomorrow, perhaps not. For much of the existence of Homo erectus, survival probably depended on mobility rather than permanent settlement. Resources moved. Rainfall shifted. Animals migrated. Plants ripened seasonally. Water sources expanded and disappeared. Remaining in one location indefinitely would often have made little sense. So groups likely moved through familiar territories, returning to useful places when conditions allowed. That does not mean their camps were random. A suitable place offers several advantages. Water should be nearby, but sleeping directly beside it can be dangerous. Crocodiles, large mammals, and insects also appreciate convenient water access. Higher ground provides visibility. Trees offer shade. Rock overhangs can block wind and rain. Nearby stone may provide raw material for tools. A good campsite is therefore a compromise between comfort, safety, and access to resources. You watch several individuals move through the area. One places a stone tool near a cluster of food remains. Another settles beside a younger child. A third walks towards the edge of the camp and looks outward across the open ground. There are no marked rooms. Still, different activities may naturally collect in different spaces. Stoneworking produces sharp flakes that are unpleasant beneath sleeping bodies. Butchery creates scraps that attract scavengers. Children probably benefit from remaining near adults. Even without architecture, repeated habits can organize space. Archaeologists sometimes identify such patterns through clusters of tools, bones, burned material, and other debris. The interpretation is difficult. Water can move objects. Animals can scatter them. People may revisit the same place hundreds of times. What appears to be one household scene may actually represent many separate visits compressed into a single archaeological layer. Ancient camps are untidy storytellers. Still, certain sites suggest that early humans repeatedly used favored locations. Near water, raw material, or animal pathways, the same advantages would remain attractive across generations. You can imagine children growing familiar with particular trees and rock faces. Later, those children become adults and return with younger companions. A temporary camp can therefore be socially important without ever becoming a permanent settlement. The group around you is small. Exactly how small is uncertain. Fossils rarely provide a reliable head count. Comparisons with modern primates and foraging societies have inspired estimates, but those analogies must be used carefully. A local Homo erectus group may have contained several adults and children, perhaps connected to a wider network of neighboring groups. Whether those larger social networks resembled later human communities is still disputed. Researchers continue to debate how complex early Homo erectus social organization became, especially because behavior leaves far fewer traces than anatomy. But some cooperation is difficult to avoid. Children require care. Food acquisition can be unpredictable. Injured individuals may struggle temporarily. Predators are easier to monitor with several pairs of eyes. And learned skills survive only if younger individuals remain close enough to observe experienced ones. You look toward the toothless elder you encountered earlier in the Caucasus. That individual may have survived because companions helped, or perhaps naturally left them were enough. The ambiguity remains. Yet social tolerance itself would have value. A group that abandons every temporarily weak member also loses experience. Older individuals may know where seasonal water appears. They may recognize dangerous animals. They may remember which stones fracture cleanly. Knowledge can be carried inside bodies as effectively as food can be carried in hands. That makes age useful. The evening cools. A child follows an adult, collecting branches or other material from the edge of camp. You cannot know where the fire will be used tonight. Instead, focus on the interaction. The younger individual copies movements. A branch is picked up, then another. A useless piece is discarded after the adult rejects something similar. No formal lesson is necessary. Learning can hide inside ordinary repetition. Modern children often imitate long before they understand why. Ancient children probably did the same. The quirky possibility is that play may have mattered more than archaeologists can usually detect. Young primates rehearse adult behavior through games. They chase, they carry, they manipulate objects. A child tapping stones together may be amusing itself while accidentally learning the mechanics of fracture. A youngster throwing sticks could be practicing or doing both. Almost none of this would fossilize. The archaeological record preserves adulthood far better than childhood. That creates a strangely serious version of prehistory. Tools remain. Games vanish. You hear sudden laughter in your imagination, although whether Homo erectus laughter sounded like yours is unknowable. Great apes already produce play vocalizations, so some form of laughter-like behavior may have deep evolutionary roots. Still, assigning modern emotional expressions directly to ancient humans requires caution. You can suggest joy. You cannot excavate it. Nearby, an adult touches another individual briefly on the shoulder. Grooming may also have helped maintain social bonds. Primates commonly use touch to reduce tension and strengthen relationships. As human groups became larger or more mobile, vocal communication may have supplemented physical grooming. One influential idea proposes that language eventually allowed social bonding to scale beyond what grooming alone could manage. But applying that argument directly to Homo erectus remains speculative. Their communication system is one of the great missing pieces of the story. Their brains were larger than those of many earlier hominins. Their lives required coordination. Their tools were learned socially. Yet speech leaves no straightforward fossil. The anatomy of the vocal tract is difficult to reconstruct. Brain organization gives hints, not transcripts. Historians and evolutionary researchers still disagree about whether Homo erectus possessed only complex calls, a proto-language, or something more sophisticated. Whatever they used, the group must communicate somehow. Movement alone requires it. When to leave, where danger lies, who has found food, which child is missing. Perhaps gestures carried much of the information. Hands were already freed from locomotion. Faces could signal attention. Vocal calls could travel through vegetation when individuals lost sight of one another. Communication did not need modern grammar to be useful. Darkness begins gathering between the trees. Several individuals move closer together. This may be another practical feature of social life. Sleeping in a cluster can provide warmth. It can also make vigilance easier. Some members may wake while others rest. Whether early humans deliberately took turns keeping watch is unknown, but group sleeping offers obvious advantages in predator-rich landscapes. The youngest individuals remain close to adults. You can hear breathing gradually slowing. One person shifts against the ground. Another scratches at an insect bite. The earth beneath you is hard. There is no mattress. Yet bedding may not have been completely absent. Later archaeological sites preserve evidence of deliberately arranged plant material used for sleeping surfaces. For Homo erectus, such evidence is much weaker. Leaves, grasses, and branches decay quickly. A comfortable bedding layer could disappear without leaving anything recognizable. So the absence of preserved beds does not prove everyone slept directly on bare stone every night. Organic life disappears too easily. This problem affects shelters as well. Simple windbreaks made from branches could have existed. Temporary shade structures are possible. Some disputed sites have been interpreted as preserving arrangements suggestive of huts or constructed living spaces. Most researchers remain cautious, especially for very early periods. Natural processes can produce circles of stones. Branches almost never survive. The safest picture is not a neat prehistoric village. It is flexible use of natural shelter, perhaps occasionally improved with perishable materials. You look around the camp again. Nothing here needs to last for centuries. It only needs to work tonight. That may be the hidden genius of mobile life. Permanent structures require investment. Mobility requires knowledge. You must remember the landscape instead of controlling it. You carry tools instead of furniture. You maintain relationships instead of property boundaries. The entire social world moves with you. That does not make it simple. It may make cooperation even more important. Tomorrow the group must decide where to travel. Somebody must know the route. Children must keep pace. Food must be found again. Danger must be noticed before it arrives. And every new generation must learn enough from the previous one to repeat the process. The night settles fully. Wind moves through the branches above you. The scent of soil grows stronger as the air cools. Around you there is no city house or village, yet there are companions. For a species living across unstable landscapes that may have been the most important shelter of all. Section 10. Morning reaches the camp slowly, first as a pale line beneath the trees. The youngest individuals wake before several adults. One child rolls onto an elbow, brushes dried grass from the shoulder, and watches an older companion working nearby. There are no lessons scheduled today. There is no school, no carved symbols, weight on a wall, and no patient teacher has prepared a prehistoric worksheet. Yet learning has already begun. You sit near the child and listen as stones click softly together. The air still carries the cool smell of damp earth. Somewhere beyond the camp, birds begin calling from the water. An adult examines a stone core, turns it once, then strikes. A flake breaks free. The child watches everything. Growing up as Homo erectus meant entering a world where survival knowledge could not be stored in books. It had to live inside other people. Which waterholes remained reliable during dry months? Which animals were dangerous when approached from downwind? Which fruits could be eaten? Which roots required processing? Which stones fractured cleanly? Children learned by remaining close to people who already knew. That simple arrangement created one of the most important systems in human evolution. Culture could pass between generations. You watch the youngster pick up a discarded fragment. The grip is clumsy. The stone is struck against another rock at an awkward angle. Nothing useful happens. The child tries again. Still nothing. An adult glances over but does not intervene immediately. Perhaps this is play. Perhaps it is practice. Most likely the distinction would mean very little to the child. Young primates today frequently learn through exploration and imitation. Human children do it constantly. They copy movements before understanding their purpose, then gradually connect action with result. Early human childhood may have worked in a similar way. Exactly how long that childhood lasted is more difficult to answer. Modern humans mature unusually slowly. You spend many years growing before reaching full physical and social independence. Compared with other apes, your extended childhood provides an enormous period for learning. Homo erectus appears to have stood somewhere between earlier apes and later humans. Dental development gives some of the best clues. Teeth grow according to biological schedules, leaving microscopic records inside enamel. By studying those patterns, researchers can estimate how quickly ancient individuals developed. Evidence suggests Homo erectus probably matured faster than modern humans. However, development may already have been slowing compared with more primitive ancestors. Scientists still disagree about exactly when the exceptionally prolonged human childhood emerged. The answer changes how you imagine every camp. A faster-growing child becomes independent sooner. A slower-growing one requires more food, attention, and protection for longer. That dependency creates costs. But it also creates opportunities. More time near experienced adults means more time to learn. You follow a child toward the riverbank. Small feet leave temporary marks in soft mud. The child carries a stick nearly as long as its body. Every few steps it pokes the ground. A beetle disappears beneath a leaf. The stick immediately follows. Nothing useful is captured, but the curiosity itself matters. Ancient childhood was probably filled with activities that left no archaeological trace. Chasing insects, collecting stems, watching adults, throwing sticks, following footprints, learning which sounds in tall grass deserve attention. Nearly all of this vanished. Stone tools dominate museums because stone survives. Children rarely organize their lives around what future museums prefer. That creates a peculiar distortion. When archaeologists reconstruct Homo erectus, adults seem to spend enormous amounts of time manufacturing tools and processing animals. They certainly did those things. But children probably spent just as much time doing deeply unimportant things. They played. They wandered a little too far. They picked up objects adults had just put down. Somewhere in the Pleistocene, an exhausted parent almost certainly regretted having children for approximately 12 seconds. Then life continued. You hear a sharp call from behind. The youngster immediately turns. Perhaps the child has crossed some invisible boundary around the camp. Danger would make childhood rules important. Water edges conceal predators. Snakes hide beneath vegetation. Large mammals can become aggressive without warning. Even a minor injury could become serious. A child who learned quickly when to stop, follow, hide, or return gained an advantage. This is where communication becomes essential. Researchers cannot reconstruct the language of Homo erectus, assuming anything deserving that word existed. Yet adults needed ways to direct younger individuals. Calls could signal danger. Gestures could indicate direction. Facial expressions could show approval or irritation. Repeated sounds may have referred to familiar situations. Whether these systems developed into true proto-language remains unresolved. Some scholars connect larger brains and increasingly complex cooperation with the greater vocal communication. Others argue that the neurological and anatomical evidence cannot demonstrate anything resembling modern language. You hear voices anyway. They are low rhythmic and impossible to translate. The child understands them. That is enough. Later in the morning, several adults begin moving toward another feeding area. The younger individuals follow. One remains close to an older female. Another walks between two adults. A smaller child may need occasional carrying. Long-distance mobility creates a problem when young legs tire quickly. Humans could not simply leave children behind during frequent movement. Adult bodies therefore became transportation as well as protection. Exactly how Homo erectus infants were carried is unknown. They may have clung to body hair when very young, although reduced body hair would eventually make that more difficult. Adults could support them with arms. Simple slings made from hide or plant fibers are imaginable, but such materials almost never survive. There is no firm evidence proving early baby carriers existed. Still, the practical problem certainly did. Try walking several kilometers with a tired toddler. Evolution becomes surprisingly relatable. The group pauses beneath trees as the midday heat strengthens. A child watches an adult examine fruit. One item is smelled and discarded. Another is opened. A portion changes hands. Food choice becomes another lesson. Much of human knowledge probably entered young minds without formal instruction. Observe. Copy. Remember. Avoid repeating painful mistakes. But some skills may have required more. Stone knapping becomes especially interesting here. Producing a basic sharp flake can happen accidentally. Producing repeated useful forms demands practice. A Keolian hand-axe manufacture requires planning several strikes ahead. An experienced learner must understand angles, force, and stone quality. Experimental studies with modern participants suggest observation helps greatly. Verbal teaching can make difficult techniques easier to acquire. This does not prove Homo erectus used spoken instruction. It does show why researchers debate whether advanced toolmaking encouraged more intentional teaching. Perhaps an adult repositioned a youngster's hand. Perhaps the teacher demonstrated slowly. Perhaps irritation did most of the educational work. The archaeological record remains silent about teaching style. As afternoon fades, the children begin playing near the resting group. One throws a small stick toward another. The second grabs it and runs. A third follows. Dust rises around their feet. The sound is light and energetic against the quieter rhythm of adults preparing tools. Play may seem irrelevant to survival. Biologically, it can be extremely useful. Young animals develop coordination through movement. Social play teaches boundaries. Object play builds manipulation to skills. Pretend activities can rehearse adult behavior. Some primatologists even observe young apes carrying sticks in ways that resemble infant care. Whether Homo erectus children engaged in symbolic pretend play is unknowable. Still, their long years of learning almost certainly contained experimentation. That experimentation may help explain cultural stability. A tool tradition, surviving for hundreds of thousands of years, must be reproduced faithfully enough to continue. Yet each learner also introduces small differences. One grip changes. One flaking sequence works better. A new material requires adaptation. Culture remains stable while slowly shifting. That is a remarkable achievement for people without writing. Nothing is recorded outside memory and behavior. If every knowledgeable adult dies, some knowledge may disappear permanently. If skilled individuals survive and teach, traditions continue. Children therefore become the bridge across deep time. You look at the youngster beside you again. The child is no famous ancestor. No fossil skull will necessarily preserve this particular life. Yet the species depends on children like this one. Every generation must inherit enough knowledge to find food, recognize danger, travel through remembered landscapes, and make essential tools. Then those children must someday become the adults being watched. Evening begins, cooling the camp. The smell of dust gives way to moist vegetation. Insects hum around the water. An older individual sits beside a younger one, turning a stone slowly between both hands. The child watches. 1,000,000 years from now, other hands will still shape stone in recognizable ways. The tools survive because the lessons survive. And for Homo erectus, perhaps that was one of the quietest secrets behind 2,000,000 years of endurance. Section 11. The lesson continues, but the landscape does not stay still long enough to become comfortable. At first, the changes seem minor. Rain arrives a little later than expected. A familiar waterhole shrinks more quickly during the dry season. Grass grows thinner on one slope while woodland thickens beside another river. Then across generations, those small changes accumulate. The world around Homo erectus begins to transform again. You stand beneath a pale sky and feel hot wind moving across an open plain. Dust collects against your ankles. The air smells dry with only a faint trace of vegetation remaining in the heat. Far ahead, a herd moves toward a distant water source. The humans nearby watch them carefully. For a mobile species, animals are more than food. They are information. Where large herbivores travel, water and vegetation often lie somewhere ahead. Following their movement can reveal how the wider landscape is changing. The Pleistocene was never climatically calm. Temperatures rose and fell repeatedly. Rainfall patterns shifted. Forests expanded during some periods and retreated during others. Grasslands spread across areas that had once been more wooded. Later, colder glacial phases transformed huge portions of Eurasia. These changes did not happen at one steady pace. Some unfolded over thousands of years. Others could alter local environments surprisingly quickly. For the people living through them, climate was not a graph. It was hunger. It was distance. It was whether a stream still flowed when children arrived beside it. You walk toward a river that the group has visited before. The bank appears familiar. The water does not. A broad channel has become a chain of muddy pools. Fish struggle in shallow sections. Animals crowd around what remains. That concentration offers food, but it also creates danger. Predators gather near, disappearing water. Competition becomes sharper. A place once remembered as safe may suddenly require caution. This is where memory can become both useful and misleading. Older individuals may remember where water lasted during previous dry years, but environmental change sometimes makes old knowledge obsolete. A species surviving for enormous spans of time must do something difficult. It must remember without becoming trapped by memory. You can see the problem clearly. One route worked last season. Now it fails. One valley once held edible plants. Now drought has removed them. The group must adjust. Perhaps they move farther. Perhaps they change what they eat. Perhaps they divide temporally and search in different directions. No fossil records the argument that may happen before such decisions. Still, the consequences appear in patterns of movement and occupation. Some archaeological sites show repeated human presence. Others seem to be abandoned for long intervals. A disappearance does not always mean extinction. People may simply have moved elsewhere. Later conditions improve and humans return. This repeated advance and retreat may have characterized much of Homo erectus history. The quirky part is that the environment itself may have trained humans to become flexible. One influential idea in human evolution is called variability selection. Instead of adapting perfectly to one stable habitat, early humans may have benefited from traits useful under changing conditions. Flexible diet helps. Mobility helps. Social learning helps. Tools help. None of these solves every problem. Together they reduce dependence on one narrow way of living. Researchers still debate how important climatic variability was in shaping human evolution. Some studies find strong connections between environmental shifts and major evolutionary changes. Others warn that the timing does not always match neatly. Evolution rarely follows climate like a loyal dog. The relationship is complicated by geography, population size, ecology, and chance. You leave the drying river behind. Generations pass around you almost like changes in weather. The landscape becomes greener. Rain returns. Woodland spreads across slopes that were once open. Streams cut new channels through softer ground. The air smells richer, now filled with damp soil and leaves. Insects become louder. Different animals appear. The humans adapt again. A body designed for efficient walking across open country remains useful here. It carries people between patches of fruiting trees. It follows river corridors through thicker vegetation. Hands carry tools where local stone may be scarce. A broad diet turns unfamiliar resources into possible food. Specialists thrive when their preferred world remains intact. Generalists often perform better when the world refuses to cooperate. That distinction may help explain the remarkable endurance of Homo erectus. I begin to imagine time on a larger scale. 100,000 years passes. Then another. The climate swings. Populations spread. Some disappear. New groups enter old territories. Across Eurasia, colder conditions become increasingly important. Northern populations experience winters unlike anything familiar to tropical ancestors. Breath turns visible in the air. Ground hardens beneath frost. Plants become seasonal. Animals grow thicker coats and change migration routes. Without modern clothing or permanent houses, surviving these environments requires new behavior. Exactly how far north early Homo erectus regularly lived remains debated. Evidence from some northern sites is controversial because dating and species identification can be difficult. Still, later archaic humans clearly pushed deeper into cold environments. The foundations for that adaptability may have been developing much earlier. Fire, whenever it became habitual, would eventually change the possibilities dramatically. So would better shelter. So would social cooperation. You pull closer to a rocky overhang while cold rain begins. Water taps softly against stone. The air smells of wet earth and animal hide. If the group has covering materials, they would be valuable now. If not, bodies press closer beneath the natural shelter. Weather creates social pressure. Cold individuals need warmth. Hungry individuals need food. Children slow movement. Injured adults may require assistance. Environmental stress exposes the weaknesses of a group. It can also make cooperation more valuable. Then climate changes in another way entirely. In Southeast Asia, shifting sea levels repeatedly transform coastlines. During colder periods, more water becomes locked inside ice sheets. Sea levels fall. Large areas of shallow continental shelf become dryland. Islands connect to wider land masses. When ice melts later, seas rise again and separate them. For humans spreading toward Java, these changes matter enormously. Routes open, then they close. Populations can become isolated on land that later becomes surrounded by water. That isolation may preserve unusual regional populations for extremely long periods. You will encounter some of them later. For now, imagine standing on a plain where ocean will exist in another age. Grass moves beneath your feet. Animals cross freely between territories that future maps will show as separate islands. No one around you knows that coastline can move. They simply follow usable land. This is another reason modern geography can mislead when thinking about prehistory. The map you know is temporary. Mountains move slowly. Rivers change course. Deserts expand. Sea levels rise and fall by enormous distances. Even entire migration routes can vanish beneath water. The ancient humans never lived on a fixed planet. Neither do you, though your lifetime makes it easier to pretend. Another drought arrives. This one lasts longer. You feel heat pressing down before midday. Dust hangs in the air. The group walks farther between reliable water sources. Their bodies lose moisture quickly. Children become quieter. Nobody wastes energy. There is no dramatic struggle every hour. Mostly there is endurance. That is the hidden scale of survival. A species can endure immense climatic instability without ever understanding climate itself. It only needs enough behavioral flexibility to survive one generation after another. Some groups fail. That must be remembered. The survival of Homo erectus does not mean every local population succeeded. Many probably disappeared. A valley becomes too dry. A disease spreads. A group becomes too small. A migration route closes. Extinction can happen locally while the wider species continues elsewhere. This mosaic of success and failure may be the real reason the lineage lasts so long. Its range becomes insurance. If one population disappears in Africa, another persists elsewhere. If conditions worsen in northern areas, southern refuges remain. Geographical spread protects the species from one single disaster. You climb a ridge as evening approaches. Behind you lies dry country. Ahead, a greener valley catches the last orange light. The wind carries the smell of water. Several individuals begin descending toward it. Nobody celebrates. They simply found another place where life is possible. That is enough. Across countless climatic swings, Homo erectus keeps doing the same quiet thing. Move. Adjust. Remember. Abandon what no longer works. And somewhere inside that pattern lies one of the strongest explanations for why this human lineage survived for so astonishingly long. Section 12. The greener valley ahead does not promise safety. It only offers another chance. You descend toward it with the group as evening light settles across the water. Cool air rises from the river. The smell of damp soil replaces the dry dust that followed you across the ridge. Insects hum among reeds, and somewhere nearby, a bird gives a slow, repetitive call. After so many changing landscapes, a pattern is becoming clear. Homo erectus did not survive because the world remained friendly. It survived because it rarely depended on the world staying the same. You watch the group spread slightly along the riverbank. One person searches beneath low vegetation. Another examines stones exposed by moving water. A young individual follows closely, copying the movements of an adult. Nothing here looks revolutionary. That may be the secret. Evolutionary success is often imagined as a sequence of dramatic breakthroughs. A larger brain appears. A new weapon changes everything. Fire transforms the night. One invention launches a species into a new age. Real survival is usually less theatrical. Most days are won through small adjustments. A different food is accepted. A familiar route is abandoned. A tool is reshaped because the local stone behaves differently. A group moves a few kilometers earlier than usual. These decisions do not look impressive from a distance. Repeated across thousands of generations, they can keep a lineage alive for an astonishing length of time. You kneel beside the water. The current is slow here. Rounded stones press cold against your palm. Some are useful for cutting tools. Others are too brittle. The group seems to know the difference quickly. That ability to recognize useful materials is one form of flexibility. A population entering a new region cannot always rely on the exact stone found in its old territory. It must learn the properties of unfamiliar rock. Some materials require heavier strikes, others fracture cleanly with delicate blows. Toolmakers adjust. That adjustment is culture responding to geology. The same principle applies to food. In one region, large grazing animals may provide frequent opportunities. Elsewhere, smaller game plants, shellfish roots, or seasonal fruits become more important. A narrow diet would make expansion difficult. A broad one turns unfamiliar landscapes into possible homes. This is why researchers often describe members of the genus Homo as increasingly flexible generalists. The term can sound unimpressive. Nobody puts excellent generalist on an action movie poster. Biologically, however, it is powerful. A specialist may perform extraordinarily well under the right conditions. If those conditions disappear, specialization becomes dangerous. A generalist may be less perfect at any single task, but capable of surviving when circumstances change. You see this in the group before you. They are not the fastest predators. They do not possess the strongest jaws. They cannot digest every tough plant. They lack claws, thick fur, or enormous teeth. Instead, they combine several moderate abilities: walking, carrying, cutting, remembering, sharing, learning. Each ability expands the usefulness of the others. The result is not physical dominance. It is options. And options are valuable when climates swing repeatedly. The next morning, the group moves upstream. The valley narrows gradually. Trees become denser along the water while exposed slopes remain dry and open. Within a short distance, several habitats overlap. That diversity may have been particularly useful. Some paleoanthropologists have suggested that human evolution often occurred in ecologically variable landscapes rather than uniform environments. A patchwork of woodland, grassland, wetlands, and rocky terrain encourages movement between resource zones. It also rewards behavioral flexibility. Researchers still debate how strongly such environmental variability drove the evolution of early Homo. Some models emphasize rapid climate fluctuations. Others point toward broader ecological opportunities, demographic changes, or social factors. There is no single accepted formula explaining the success of Homo erectus. That uncertainty is useful. It prevents you from turning 2 million years of survival into one convenient slogan. The group pauses beneath shade. An adult places several stones on the ground. One is struck and immediately discarded after fracturing badly. A second produces a sharper flake. The person continues with that material instead. You are watching innovation at its smallest scale. There is no need to invent an entirely new technology. Simply recognizing what fails and changing behavior is enough. That may sound obvious to you. It was not biologically guaranteed. Many animals repeat successful routines very effectively, but struggle when problems change too quickly. Early humans appear increasingly capable of transferring learned behavior into unfamiliar situations. How far that cognitive flexibility extended remains debated. You should not imagine modern reasoning hidden inside an ancient skull. Their brains were smaller than yours. Their symbolic world, if one existed, remains uncertain. But sophisticated survival does not require modern abstract thought. It requires enough memory and learning to modify behavior when old habits stop working. There is a quirky example hidden in how stone tools vary across regions. For decades, archaeologists sometimes treated differences in tool traditions as direct measures of mental ability. More complex tools supposedly meant more advanced minds. Today, that assumption receives much more caution. A simple tool may reflect local needs rather than limited intelligence. If one sharp flake solves the problem, producing an elaborate hand axe may waste time and energy. Humans have always been capable of using the easiest solution available. That tradition appears wonderfully ancient. The group continues uphill. By midday, you enter cooler air. Vegetation changes again. The smell of wet leaves becomes stronger beneath taller trees. Food found along the lower river may be absent here. Nobody complains to the climate. Instead, searching patterns change. The group spreads more widely. One adult turns over fallen branches. Another watches the canopy. The children imitate them. Flexibility is not only an individual quality, it can exist across generations. One person discovers a useful resource. Others notice. Youngsters remember. If the behavior spreads through the group and innovation becomes tradition, that process can happen without writing or formal instruction. Social learning therefore acts as a second inheritance system. Genes pass biological traits. Culture passes behavior. This distinction becomes increasingly important in human evolution. Genetic change is so. Cultural change can happen within one lifetime. A population facing a new environment does not always need to wait thousands of generations for anatomy to adapt. It can alter behavior first. Perhaps that was one of the greatest advantages possessed by Homo erectus. Not culture in the modern sense of art, religion, or written law. Something more basic, learned ways of solving repeated problems. You feel the afternoon becoming colder. Clouds gather above the valley. Rain begins gently. The group moves beneath the rock shelter rather than continuing along the exposed slope. That decision is small. It is also adaptive. Wait through bad weather. Travel later. Save energy. Avoid unnecessary risk. I begin noticing how often survival depends on refusing to do anything heroic. A species lasting for nearly 2 million years probably succeeded through caution as often as courage. The rain strengthens. Water runs in thin lines down the rock face. The sound becomes steady and soothing. People sit close together. Someone works on a stone edge. A child examines a piece of wood. Another individual chews slowly on stored food. No one controls the storm. No one needs to. They simply endure it. That difference matters. Adaptability does not mean conquering nature. It means remaining functional while nature changes around you. When the rain finally weakens, mist hangs across the valley. The group waits several more minutes before leaving. There is no urgency. The path will still be there. Later human societies will sometimes build enormous systems to control rivers, forests, and landscapes. These people survive differently. They move through the environment rather than reshaping it on a massive scale. Their strength lies in responsiveness. If one place fails, move. If one food disappears, try another. If one stone breaks poorly, choose a different stone. If colder weather arrives, seek shelter. Simple decisions accumulate. That accumulation may explain more about their longevity than any single dramatic invention. You step back outside. Water drips from leaves. The air smells fresh and cool. Ahead, the valley opens again beneath a clearing sky. Somewhere beyond those hills, another population of Homo erectus is solving different problems in a different way. Across Africa and Eurasia, thousands of such adjustments are happening at once. Not perfectly, not everywhere successfully, but often enough. That may be the real secret behind their endurance. They were never invincible. They were simply difficult to eliminate. Section 13. The mist from the valley follows you eastward until the land changes again. The air becomes colder. Hills rise around you, rough and pale beneath a washed morning sky. Wind moves through sparse vegetation and carries the smell of stone-dry grass and distant smoke. Ahead, limestone cliffs break the horizon. Within them lies a place that will become one of the most famous sites in the history of human evolution. You are approaching Shukodian. Today this region lies southwest of Beijing. During the Middle Pleistocene, however, the landscape surrounding these limestone hills looked very different. Animals moved through open woodland and grassland. Winters could become sharply cold. Caves offered shelter, shadow, and protection from wind. And at some point during this long span of time, ancient humans repeatedly entered the cave system. Much later scientists would call some of them Pecking Man. The name sounds almost like a single person. It was nothing of the sort. Pecking Man refers to a collection of Homo erectus fossils discovered at Zhukudian during the 20th century. The bones represent multiple individuals living across a broad period. Some dates remain debated because the deposits accumulated over immense stretches of time. Still, the site became central to understanding Homo erectus in East Asia. You enter the cave. The temperature drops immediately. Stone beneath your feet feels damp and uneven. Drops of water fall from somewhere in the darkness. Each sound carries farther than it should. The smell is mineral and cold mixed with soil and old animal remains. For ancient humans, such a place could offer obvious advantages. Caves block wind. They provide shade. They create defensible spaces, but they are rarely empty. Large carnivores also appreciate them. Hyenas, bears, and other animals may occupy the same shelter at different times. A cave is less a home than valuable real estate with terrible neighbors. At Zhukodian, large quantities of animal bones accumulated alongside human remains and stone tools. This led researchers to ask who controlled the cave. Did humans bring animals inside? Did predators bring humans inside? Did both use the site at different times? The answer remains complicated. Earlier interpretations sometimes imagined Peking Man as an active cave-dwelling hunter controlling fire and butchering animals nearby. Later research has challenged parts of that picture. Some bones may have been accumulated by carnivores. Water and sediment may have moved material. The cave was used repeatedly over long periods, making it difficult to separate one occupation from another. You crouch beside a satter of stone fragments. Many tools from the site are relatively simple. Flakes were struck from cores and used for cutting or scraping. Some pieces show deliberate shaping. Others are barely modified. Again, simplicity should not be confused with uselessness. A sharp flake can perform many tasks without looking impressive in a museum case. The humans here were adapting to local materials. Much of the available stone around Zhoukoudian is quartz and other rock that fractures differently from the fine flint often associated with later European tools. Raw material shapes technology. A clever toolmaker cannot make stone behave like something it is not. You hear a crack from deeper in the cave. An individual strikes one piece against another. The sound is sharp and brief. A flake falls onto limestone. The person examines it, then uses the edge against some material you cannot clearly see. Round the group, younger individuals watch. The pattern is familiar now. Skills survive because somebody observes, somebody remembers, somebody repeats. Pecking Man also became famous for something more dramatic. Fire. For decades, burned bones, ash-like deposits and darkened sediments at Zhoukoudian were widely treated as strong evidence that Homo erectus regularly controlled fire. That interpretation helped shape popular images of Peking Man sitting around hearths inside the cave. The story is wonderfully atmospheric. Unfortunately, archaeology enjoys ruining atmosphere. Later studies questioned whether all supposed ash layers were actually produced by human fires. Some deposits may have formed through geological processes. Burned materials could have come from natural fires elsewhere. Other researchers still argue that certain traces support human fire use. The debate remains open in parts. So you should resist placing a neat hearth in the center of every Zhoukoudian evening. Perhaps fire burned here regularly. Perhaps it was used only occasionally. Perhaps some evidence has been mixed and moved over time. The uncertainty makes the cave darker. Literally. Without reliable fire, winter nights would have been harsh. Northern China experiences cold conditions very different from tropical Africa. Surviving here suggests strong behavioral flexibility. Humans may have shifted seasonally. They may have used caves more during certain periods. Animal skins could have provided insulation, though. Direct evidence for clothing this early is extremely limited. Body hair, shelter groups, sleeping and movement between warmer zones may all have helped. Researchers still argue over how well Homo erectus could tolerate sustained cold and whether occupations at Zhoukoudian were year-round. The fossils do not preserve winter schedules, yet humans were present repeatedly. That fact alone matters. You step deeper into the cave and meet the faces that made Zhoukoudian famous. Heavy brow ridges stretch above the eyes. The skulls are long and low. Brain size is larger than in some earlier populations, though still generally below modern human averages. The bones of the skull are thick. Faces remain robust. These are not the small Dmanisi individuals you met earlier. Hundreds of, thousands of years of change and regional variation lie between them. Still, the broader Homo erectus pattern remains recognizable. Long survival does not mean biological stillness. Populations evolve. Bodies change gradually. Local environments produce variation. That complicates the idea of one species lasting unchanged for nearly 2 million years. You are not following a frozen design. You are following a lineage capable of changing while remaining broadly recognizable. Then you come to one of the strangest parts of the Zhoukoudian story. The original fossils are missing. Many of the most important Peking Man skulls and bones were excavated during the 1920s and 30s. Scientists made casts and detailed descriptions. Then war reached China. In 1941. During the chaos surrounding the Second World War, the fossils were packed for transport, apparently with the hope of moving them to safety. They vanished. No one knows with certainty what happened next. They may have been lost during military transport. They may have been destroyed. They may have been hidden and never recovered. Stories have circulated for decades. Some claim the fossils sank aboard a ship. Others imagine boxes buried near military facilities. Occasional reports suggest somebody secretly possesses them. None has been proven. It is perhaps the most frustrating treasure hunt in paleoanthropology. Imagine discovering some of the most important human fossils ever found, studying them carefully, and then losing the originals during wartime. Museums generally prefer a different inventory system. Fortunately, casts survived. Measurements survived. Drawings survived. Later excavations at Zhoukoudian also uncovered additional fossils. So Peking Man did not disappear completely from science. Still, the missing originals cast a permanent shadow over the site. You stand inside the cave and imagine those skulls resting here long before anyone considered them valuable. They survived hundreds of thousands of years underground. Then modern history almost erased them within a few years of discovery. There is something deeply ironic about that. The ancient humans endured climate shifts, predators, and geological change. Their fossils then encountered 20th century logistics that prove considerably more dangerous. Outside the cave, daylight is beginning to fade. Cold air moves downslope. The smell of vegetation grows sharper as evening approaches. You can hear small stones shifting beneath the feet of people leaving the shelter. Some carry tools, some carry food. Perhaps others simply follow. The cave does not reveal whether one family used it for weeks or many groups returned across generations. It does not tell you what they called one another. It does not preserve their voices, but it shows that Homo erectus had reached far into East Asia and remained there across enormous spans of time. That matters more than any single dramatic discovery. The species was no longer simply spreading, it was becoming regional. Different populations occupied distant landscapes and solved different ecological problems. Some lived near tropical forests, others faced colder northern seasons. Some shaped hand axes regularly, others relied on different tool traditions. Variation was becoming part of the survival strategy itself. You leave Zhukodien behind as the hills darken. Far to the south, another branch of this ancient story has already reached tropical Southeast Asia. There on an island, landscape shaped by rivers and shifting seas, Homo erectus will survive astonishingly late, and its fossils will transform the scientific world once again. Java is waiting. Section 14. The colder hills of northern China fade behind you and the world becomes warmer with every imagined step south. Air thickens, vegetation crowds closer to the river. The smell of damp leaves, mud, and tropical growth replaces the dry mineral scent of Zhukudian's limestone caves. Rain falls harder here. It strikes broad leaves with a steady patter, then gathers into shallow streams that run beneath your feet. Far ahead beyond forests and volcanic ridges lies Java. Today you think of Java as an island. During parts of the Pleistocene that description becomes misleading. Sea levels repeatedly rose and fell as global ice expanded and melted. When enormous quantities of water became trapped in distant ice sheets, shallow seas around Southeast Asia retreated. Large parts of the Sunda Shelf became exposed land. Java could become connected more closely with mainland Southeast Asia through broad lowland corridors. Animals moved across them. Humans could follow. The map changed beneath their feet. You reach a wide river valley under a grey tropical sky. The water runs brown with the sediment. Insects hum loudly among reeds. A warm mist clings to your skin while somewhere in the forest an unseen animal snaps a branch. The landscape feels abundant, but abundance does not mean ease. Dense vegetation can hide predators. Heavy rainfall transforms rivers quickly. Food varies with season. Floods can erase familiar paths overnight. Yet Homo erectus reached this region astonishingly early. Fossils from Java have played a central role in the story of the species for more than a century. They also helped begin one of paleoanthropology's strangest scientific adventures. In the late 19th century, a Dutch anatomist named Eugène Dubois became convinced that the missing evolutionary link between apes and humans might be found in Asia. This was a bold idea at the time. It's bold, in fact, that Dubois joined the Dutch colonial army partly because it would allow him to travel to the East Indies. That is an unusually determined career change. Eventually, he began excavating along the Solar River at Trinil in eastern Java. In 1891 and 1892, workers uncovered several important fossils. A skull cap appeared, then a thigh bone. A tooth was also associated with the discoveries. Dubois believed he had found a creature intermediate between apes and humans. He eventually named it Pithecanthropus erectus. The name meant roughly upright epiman. Later researchers placed the fossils within Homo erectus. Java man had entered scientific history. You stand beside the Solo River and imagine the excitement. The river smells of wet earth. Water moves heavily around sandbanks. Workers dig into old sediments under humid heat. Then, a fragment of ancient skull emerges from soil that has hidden it for hundreds of thousands of years. The skull cap is thick. Its brow ridge is strong. The brain case is long and low. It belongs unmistakably to the broader Homo erectus pattern you now know, but its location changes everything. Human evolution was no longer something imagined only in Africa or Europe. Ancient humans had reached tropical Southeast Asia. The discovery immediately generated arguments. Some scientists doubted the fossils belonged to one individual. Others questioned whether the femur truly belonged with the skull cap. The thigh bone looked surprisingly modern. That problem has never disappeared completely. Later analysis suggested the femur may have come from a younger geological layer than the skull cap. So even one of the most famous early human discoveries contains uncertainty. The bones do not always arrive with tidy labels. You follow the river downstream. The terrain opens into grassier country. During parts of the Pleistocene, Java supported large mammals, including elephants, bovids, deer, and predators. Environmental conditions shifted substantially through time. Some periods were more open and dry. Others became wetter and more forested. Homo erectus populations living here had to respond to those changes just as their relatives did elsewhere. The tropical setting therefore should not be imagined as one endless rainforest. Java itself changed repeatedly. That matters because changing vegetation may have influenced how humans moved, hunted, gathered, and survived. A broad diet would again become useful. So would knowledge of rivers. Waterways concentrate animals and provide travel corridors. They also expose stone. Yet Java presents an interesting technological puzzle. Classic Herculean hand axes are less common here than in many Western regions. For decades, this fed older ideas that Eastern Homo erectus possessed simpler technology. Today, researchers are much more cautious. Local raw materials mattered. Wood and bamboo may have played larger roles than stone in tropical environments. Such organic tools decay almost completely. A population using clever bamboo implements might leave an archaeological record that looks frustratingly plain. Historians of prehistory still debate how much technological sophistication has vanished simply because tropical materials did not preserve. You glance toward a stand of bamboo. A hollow stem creaks in the wind. It can be cut into sharp edges. It can become a container-digging tool, spear shaft, or cutting implement. None of those objects would reliably survive for hundreds of thousands of years. Stone gets all the attention because stone refuses to rot. This creates one of archaeology's most persistent biases. The quiet tools may be missing. The people remain judged by whatever geology was willing to keep. Rain begins again. The group you're following moves toward higher ground near the river. Water runs across their legs. Mud pulls at their feet. The smell of vegetation becomes almost sweet beneath the rain. One adult carries a stone flake. Another holds something wooden. A child follows closely through the slippery ground. This world demands balance and patience. Tropical heat creates other challenges. Food spoils quickly. Insects remain active. Parasites thrive in warm environments. Waterborne diseases could spread easily. None of these leave neat fossils. You cannot measure the daily burden directly. Still, long-term survival in humid lowlands required more than simply finding enough calories. It required avoiding hundreds of small dangers repeatedly. That is what makes Java important. The story here is not simply that Homo erectus arrived. It is that populations appear to have persisted through enormous environmental changes. Some later Javan fossils may be surprisingly young. At Ngandong along the Solo River, skull fragments and other remains have been interpreted as belonging to some of the last known Homo erectus populations. Modern dating has placed those fossils roughly between about 17,000 and 108,000 years ago. That is astonishingly late. By then, Homo sapiens already existed in Africa. Other human lineages occupied parts of Eurasia. Yet in Java, a deeply ancient form of humanity may still have been walking beside the river. Think about what that means. The lineage you first met nearly 2 million years earlier may have survived here almost into the world of much later humans. Not unchanged, not isolated from evolution, but recognizably connected across an immense span of time. You look at the river again. It flows quietly beneath a clearing sky. Sediment moves downstream grain by grain. Layers build. Bones become buried. Generations pass. The Homo erectus populations of Java do not know they are ancient survivors. They are simply living. One group finds food. One child learns a route. One tool breaks. One season fails. Another season improves. That ordinary rhythm continues while entire human lineages elsewhere emerge and disappear. There is a peculiar humility in that. Survival does not always belong to the most spectacular species. Sometimes it belongs to the one that keeps adjusting. Still, Java also hints at the ending. Isolation can protect a population for long periods. It can also make recovery difficult when conditions deteriorate. If forests expand beyond familiar limits, preferred resources may shrink. If populations become too small, every drought matters more. If the newcomers arrive, competition may increase. Researchers still debate exactly what ended the final Javan Homo erectus populations. The last fossils do not tell you whether climate, ecology, population decline, competition, or several pressures combined. For now, the answer remains ahead. Evening settles over the Solar River. Frogs begin calling from the wet margins. The air remains warm against your skin. Across the water, several ancient humans move beneath darkening trees. They look small against the tropical landscape, yet their lineage has already endured longer than almost any other human species we know. Tomorrow you will begin to understand just how extraordinary that persistence truly was. Section 50. The Solar River continues flowing long after the people beside it disappear from your sight. You remain on its bank while time begins moving faster around you. Rainy seasons arrive and vanish. Trees spread across open ground, then retreat again as climates shift. River channels wander slowly through the landscape. Volcanoes darken distant skies, covering valleys with ash that eventually becomes another thin layer beneath your feet. 1,000 years passes, then 10,000, then 100,000. and somehow Homo erectus is still here. That persistence begins to feel stranger the longer you watch. Most species appear, change, and eventually disappear within the enormous machinery of evolution. Human species are no exception. Branches divide. Populations become isolated. New anatomical forms emerge. Others leave only a few teeth or fragments of skull before vanishing from the record. Yet the broad lineage, called Homo erectus, continues through an extraordinary portion of the Pleistocene. You first encountered its early representatives close to 2 million years ago. Now you're moving through a world filled with humans who would have seemed impossible to those first travelers. The family tree has become crowded. In Africa, later forms of Homo develop larger brains and somewhat different skull shapes. Across Europe and Western Asia, populations eventually give rise to the ancestors of Neanderthals. Farther east, other archaic humans occupy enormous territories whose histories remain only partly known. Some populations may eventually contribute to the mysterious Denisovans, and somewhere among these branching lineages, the evolutionary path leading toward your own species continues quietly. The strange thing is that none of this immediately removes Homo erectus. They continue. You step into an African landscape several 100,000 years after the earliest Homo erectus populations appeared. The body shapes around you are changing. Some fossils from this broad period are difficult to classify. Their brains are larger. Faces differ from classic earlier Homo erectus. Skulls combine old and new features. Future researchers will debate names such as Homo heidelbergensis, Homo rhodesiensis, and various forms of archaic Homo sapiens. Taxonomy becomes increasingly complicated. Apparently 2 million years of humanity was not confusing enough already. The problem comes partly from evolution itself. Species do not necessarily transform in clean stages. One population may develop certain features while another retains older ones. Groups can separate geographically. They may reconnect later. Genes may move between populations. A fossil discovered in one valley can therefore look different from another fossil living during roughly the same period elsewhere. Scientists must decide whether the differences represent separate species or regional variation. They often disagree. You walk among these shifting populations while wind moves through tall grass. The afternoon smells of sun-warmed vegetation. Stone tools click somewhere beyond a low ridge. What you are witnessing is not a simple ladder from primitive to advanced. It is a branching landscape. Some branches flourish, others narrow. A few continue almost unbelievably long. That distinction matters when thinking about Homo erectus. Calling it a 2 million year species can make the lineage sound biologically frozen. It was not. Early African populations looked different from much later Javan populations. Brain sizes generally increased across parts of the lineage. Skull shapes changed. Body size varied. Different regional groups developed their own anatomical patterns. The label remains useful, but it covers an enormous amount of time and variation. Researchers still argue over whether all the fossils traditionally grouped as Homo erectus truly belong to one species. Some prefer separating early African forms as Homo ergaster. Others divide Asian populations more finely. A broader approach keeps many of them within Homo erectus, while recognizing substantial regional diversity. The argument matters because the famous longevity partly depends upon where scientists draw those boundaries. Even under cautious definitions, however, the lineage remains astonishingly persistent. You move forward again. Another 100,000 years passes. The sound of stoneworking changes. Some populations begin producing more complex, prepared core technologies. Rather than simply striking flakes from a stone whenever needed, toolmakers plan the geometry of a core more carefully. Later humans develop techniques associated with increasingly sophisticated control over flake shape. Wooden spears appear clearly in the archaeological record at later Middle Pleistocene sites. Hunting becomes more visible. Fire becomes increasingly regular. Yet old technologies do not vanish immediately. Acheulean hand axes continue in some regions. Simple flakes remain useful everywhere. Innovation does not arrive like a software update. People keep what works. That may explain something important about Homo erectus. A population does not need to possess the newest technology if existing behavior still solves local problems. In Java, isolation may have protected long-surviving populations from some competitors for considerable periods. Local ecosystem provided familiar resources. Warm climates reduced certain challenges faced by northern humans. Rivers created dependable ecological corridors. As long as enough individuals survived and reproduced, there was no evolutionary requirement to become something dramatically different. Survival rewards adequacy, not novelty. You stand beside another river in another age. The water sounds almost identical to what you heard hundreds of thousands of years earlier. An adult walks along the bank carrying a stone tool. A younger individual follows. Perhaps the scene itself helps explain the longevity. The same basic strategy still works. Find water. Search broadly for food. Move when conditions fail. Use sharp edges. Stay close to others. Teach children what matters. None of these behaviors requires a revolution. Their strength lies in repetition. Yet other human populations are now undergoing major changes. In Europe, ancestors of Neanderthals face repeated glacial cycles. Their bodies gradually become adapted to colder environments. Heavy bones, broad bodies, and powerful musculature characterize later Neanderthals. They develop sophisticated stone technologies and occupy caves across broad regions. Eventually, Neanderthals will survive for hundreds of thousands of years themselves. That is impressive. Beside Homo erectus, however, even their long history feels comparatively brief. Farther east, another human story remains almost invisible until modern genetics reveals it. Denisovans will become known not through a complete skeleton, but initially through tiny fossil fragments from a Siberian cave. A finger bone, several teeth. Later additional fossils expand the picture, yet genetic evidence reveals that these mysterious humans contributed ancestry to living populations across parts of Asia and Oceania. That discovery will transform the human family tree. Ancient humanity was not a sequence of isolated replacements. Populations met. They sometimes interbred. Their histories overlapped. Could late Homo erectus have exchanged genes with other human populations as well? Possibly. Direct evidence remains difficult. Researchers continue investigating whether some genetic signals in living or ancient humans could reflect ancestry from very old unidentified hominin populations. Such ghost populations are inferred statistically rather than represented by clearly matched fossils. Connecting any of them specifically to Homo erectus remains uncertain. Still, the possibility reminds you that extinction does not always mean complete biological disappearance. A population can vanish while fragments of its ancestry continue inside another lineage. Whether that happened with Homo erectus remains one of the quieter mysteries of human evolution. The sun sinks lower. You return in imagination to Java. A group crosses open ground near the river. Large mammals still inhabit the landscape. The humid air smells of mud and vegetation. Cicadas produce a dense wall of sound from the trees. These people have no idea that other humans elsewhere possess different skulls, tools, and evolutionary futures. They do not know Neanderthals will exist. They do not know Denisovans will leave genetic traces across distant populations. They do not know Homo sapiens is approaching. Their world remains local. That local world may have protected them, but isolation has another side. A small population can survive quietly for thousands of years while becoming increasingly vulnerable. Numbers may decline without leaving obvious archaeological evidence. Habitat can shrink gradually. Resources can become less predictable. Then one additional pressure becomes enough. You have watched Homo erectus outlast enormous climatic changes and countless generations of other humans. But longevity is not immortality. Soon the ancient lineage will begin sharing the wider world with populations carrying new combinations of bodies, technologies, and behaviors. The survivor has endured almost everything nature offered. The next challenge may come from humanity itself. Section 66. The ancient survivor becomes harder to define precisely when you look at it too closely. From a distance, Homo erectus seems almost simple. A long-lived human species appears in Africa, spreads across Eurasia, adapts to changing environments, and survives for an extraordinary span of time. But when you step nearer to the fossils, the clean outline begins to blur. You find variation everywhere. Skulls become thicker or thinner, faces broaden or narrow, brain cases differ in size, bodies vary with geography and suddenly one question becomes difficult to avoid. Were all these humans really one species? You stand now in an imagined museum of deep time, although no walls surround you. Instead, skulls seem to emerge from the darkness one by one. An early African specimen appears first, then a skull from Dmanisi, another from Java, another from China, still another from a much later period in Southeast Asia. Placed side by side, they share important similarities. The brain case is generally long and low. Heavy brow ridges often stretch above the eyes. The skull bones can be thick. The face lacks the high forehead and prominent chin familiar in modern humans. These shared traits explain why researchers have often grouped many fossils within Homo erectus. The differences, however, are impossible to ignore. Some early African fossils possess thinner cranial bones and somewhat more gracile features. Asian specimens may show particularly pronounced brow ridges and thicker cranial vaults. Brain size also varies considerably. Dmanisi individuals can be surprisingly small-brained. Later Asian specimens may approach much larger volumes. You can arrange them into a sequence, but nature did not necessarily arrange them for you. This is where Homo ergaster enters the story. Some paleoanthropologists use that name for early African humans who lived roughly during the earlier portion of the Homo erectus time span. In this view, Homo ergaster represents a distinct African species. Classic Homo erectus would then refer more specifically to Asian populations. Other researchers reject the division. They see the African and Asian fossils as regional forms within one geographically widespread species. Under that interpretation, Homo erectus simply contains substantial variation. The argument can sound like scientists disagreeing over labels. The consequences are larger. If Homo ergaster is separate, then the famous claim that one species survived for nearly 2 million years becomes less straightforward. The evolutionary story splits into multiple branches. If early African and later Asian populations belong together, then Homo erectus becomes one of the most geographically widespread and enduring human species ever known. You walk between the imaginary skulls. Their surfaces feel cool and slightly rough beneath your fingertips. Dust settles inside empty eye sockets. The air carries the dry mineral smell of old sediment. No fossil offers its own opinion. That is the problem. Modern species can sometimes be studied through behavior and reproduction. Scientists can observe whether populations regularly interbreed. Genes can reveal how isolated one group is from another. With few fossils, this ancient most genetic evidence has disappeared. Hot tropical environments are particularly cruel to DNA, so researchers often depend heavily on anatomy. Anatomy gives clues. It rarely gives certainty. Two populations can look somewhat different while still exchanging genes. Another pair can look similar while remaining reproductively isolated. Modern humans themselves vary visibly across geography without dividing into separate biological species. That comparison reminds you to be cautious. At the same time, ancient populations may have been separated for hundreds of thousands of years. Isolation can produce real evolutionary divergence. Researchers still debate how much anatomical difference is enough to justify a separate species among early humans. There is no universally accepted threshold. This is why human evolution sometimes seems crowded with names. One scientist recognizes several species, another sees a few highly variable lineages. Both can examine the same fossils and reach different conclusions. A quirky consequence is that a newly discovered jaw can spend years changing surnames. It may enter a paper under one species, appear in another researcher's analysis under a second, then quietly return to its original classification later. The fossil remains perfectly calm throughout. Humans perform the arguing. You stop beside the Demonisi skulls again. They make the problem especially uncomfortable. Several individuals from the same site display striking differences in facial shape and size. Because they lived in the same general population, their variation suggests that early Homo could be more diverse within one species than earlier researchers expected. Some scientists use Demonisi to argue that several named early human species might be collapsed into fewer categories. Others strongly disagreed. They pointed out that variation at one site cannot automatically erase distinctions across entire continents and long stretches of time. The debate continues because both cautions are reasonable. Variation exists, so does evolution. Separating the two is difficult. Then there is geography. Imagine an early population leaving Africa. Some groups remain closer to the original range. Others travel eastward over thousands of generations. Mountain systems, deserts, rivers, and changing climates create partial barriers between them. Gene flow may become irregular. Local environments favor different traits. One region rewards larger body size. Another preserves smaller populations. Food sources differ. Disease pressures differ. Gradually, regional anatomy begins to drift. At what point does a regional population become a separate species? There may never be one clear moment. Evolution does not ring a bell. You simply look backward and decide where one name should end. That problem becomes even more complicated when populations reconnect. Modern genetic research has shown that later human groups interbred despite sometimes looking quite different. Homo sapiens exchanged genes with Neanderthals. Neanderthals and Denisovans also interbred. Denisovan-related ancestry entered modern human population. These discoveries shattered older ideas that human species always existed as completely separate branches. The deeper past may have been similarly tangled. Could African and Eurasian Homo erectus populations have exchanged genes when ranges overlapped? Almost certainly some neighboring ancient populations mixed. Exactly how widely that happened remains unknown. Without recoverable DNA, you must infer possibilities from anatomy and geography. That uncertainty changes how you imagine the species. Perhaps Homo erectus was not one uniform population extending from Africa to Java. More likely it consisted of many regional groups. Some met occasionally, some remained isolated for long periods. Some disappeared. Others assured. Populations may have evolved into later human lineages. Others may have ended without descendants. The name becomes an umbrella covering a complicated evolutionary network. You continue forward in time. An African skull appears with features more advanced than classic early Homo erectus. Its brain case is larger. The face is different. Some researchers might classify such fossils as Homo heidelbergensis. Others use different names or place them within broader archaic human categories. Here another boundary problem emerges. When does Homo erectus stop being Homo erectus and become something later? Again, there is no clean line. One generation resembles its parents. Their children resemble them. No mother gives birth to an infant belonging suddenly to a completely different species because a textbook needs a new chapter. Evolution is gradual. Classification is not. That mismatch creates much of the confusion. You step outside the imaginary museum. The evening air feels warm again. Grass moves gently around your legs. Somewhere nearby, stone strikes stone with a familiar rhythm. The people themselves are unconcerned with taxonomy. They walk. They search for food. They raise children. They remember water. They survive. Perhaps this is the most useful way to understand the debate. Names help you organize the past, but the ancient past was never obligated to fit those names neatly. Whether you call the early African forms Homo ergaster African, Homo erectus, or something slightly different, the broader pattern remains extraordinary. A family of long-legged adaptable humans spread across immense distances and persisted through enormous environmental change. Their populations diversified. Some may have evolved into new forms. Others retained older features for astonishingly long periods. The story therefore becomes richer, not weaker, when the boundaries blur. You are no longer watching one identical species march unchanged across 2 million years. You are watching a resilient human lineage stretch, divide, reconnect, and transform across continents. Soon that wider human world will become even more crowded. New populations will enter the landscape. Some will carry larger brains. Some will develop different technologies. And eventually your own species will appear among them. The survivor will no longer be alone. Section 17. The wider human world is beginning to feel crowded. You leave the blurred boundaries of Homo erectus behind and walk forward into a later Pleistocene landscape. The air is cooler now. Wind presses through tall grass, carrying the smell of wet soil and distant animals across an open valley. Stone flakes lie scattered near a shallow shelter. Some look familiar, others do not. The humans who made them belong to a world that has changed profoundly since those first long-legged travelers left Africa. And Homo erectus is no longer the only successful human form moving across the continents. You notice the change first in the skulls. Later populations in Africa and Eurasia generally possess larger brains than the earliest Homo erectus groups. Their faces differ. Their bodies respond to different climates. Their technologies also become more varied. Across Western Eurasia, populations eventually lead toward Neanderthals. Farther east, other archaic humans occupy regions stretching deep into Asia. In Africa, still other populations contribute to the complicated ancestry from which Homo sapiens eventually emerges. There is no single replacement event. Instead, the human family tree begins looking less like a tree and more like tangled branches growing through one another. You cross a rocky slope and hear the steady tapping of stone from below. A toolmaker is preparing a core with greater attention than the early flake makers you watched near Manai. The stone is turned repeatedly. Several surfaces are shaped before the final flake is removed. When the strike comes, the resulting piece already has a useful predetermined form. This kind of planning becomes increasingly visible in later stone industries. Technologies associated with prepared cores eventually appear across large areas of Africa and Eurasia. They allow toolmakers to control the size and shape of flakes more precisely. That does not mean every older technology disappears. Hand axes continue. Simple flakes continue. Humans rarely throw away something useful simply because a newer method exists. Your own kitchen probably understands this principle. The important shift is growing technological variety. Different populations begin leaving increasingly distinctive archaeological signatures. In Europe, later Neanderthals become particularly famous for the Mousterian stone tool tradition. They produce scrapers, points, cutting tools, and carefully prepared flakes. Wooden technologies also become more visible at some sites. At Schöningen in what is now Germany, beautifully preserved wooden spears dating hundreds of thousands of years ago reveal surprisingly sophisticated woodworking among Middle Pleistocene humans. The spears are balanced objects. They were shaped deliberately. Their survival is almost miraculous because wood normally decays long before archaeologists arrive. Stone receives most of prehistory's publicity simply because it has excellent long-term storage habits. You imagine one spear resting in your hand. The wood feels smooth where repeated scraping has shaped the surface. Its weight extends forward. This is not a sharpened branch picked up casually during panic. Someone selected the wood. Someone shaped it. Someone understood how a long projectile should behave. Exactly which human population made every early European wooden weapon remains debated because fossils are not always found directly beside the objects. Still, hunting technology was becoming increasingly sophisticated. You move farther west. Cold air descends from distant mountain. The human bodies here seem broader and heavier than those you first followed in Africa. Much later, classic Neanderthals will become powerfully adapted to the cool and often harsh environments of Europe and Western Asia. Their limbs are relatively short. Their bodies are broad. These proportions help conserve heat. They are not lumbering failures waiting politely for modern humans to arrive. Neanderthals survived for hundreds of thousands of years. They control fire. They hunt large animals. They care for injured companions. They produce complex tools. Some use pigments, ornaments, and other materials that hint at increasingly rich social worlds. Historians of human evolution still disagree over the extent and frequency of symbolic behavior among Neanderthals, particularly when interpreting rare or ambiguous objects. But the older caricature of the dull cave brute has collapsed. You already know why that matters. A long-lived population does not survive by being hopelessly incompetent. The same lesson applied to Homo erectus. Now it applies again. Farther east the picture becomes stranger. You enter the cold landscape of southern Siberia. Snow lies between dark trees. Your breath forms clouds before your face. Hidden inside the Altai Mountains is Denisova Cave. For thousands of years, different human populations will use this place. But the people later called Denisovans will remain almost invisible to science until a tiny fragment changes everything. In 2010, researchers announced genetic results from a small finger bone found in the cave. The DNA did not belong to a modern human. It did not match Neanderthals either. A previously unknown human population had appeared through genetics before scientists possessed anything resembling a complete skeleton. That is one of paleoanthropology's wonderfully peculiar moments. An entire branch of humanity entered scientific history through part of a little finger. Later teeth bone fragments and genetic evidence expanded the picture. Denisovan-related ancestry survives today in several modern populations, particularly among people in parts of Oceania and Asia. Their geographical range may have been enormous, yet their physical appearance remains frustratingly difficult to reconstruct. You cannot confidently draw a complete Denisovan face from the evidence currently available. Their genes tell a clearer story than their skeletons, and those genes reveal something even more important. Human populations met one another. Neanderthals interbreed with ancestors of many living non-African humans. Denisovans also contributed ancestry to later modern populations. Neanderthals and Denisovans exchanged genes with each other. One individual found at Denisova Cave even had a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father. She lived roughly 90,000 years ago. Her existence turns an abstract evolutionary diagram into something almost intimate. Two human populations met. A child was born. The branches touched. I begin to reconsider the isolated Homo erectus groups farther south and east. Could they have encountered other archaic humans as well? The possibility is compelling. Late Homo erectus populations in Southeast Asia lived during periods when other hominin lineages existed elsewhere in Asia. Exactly who met whom remains uncertain. Tropical climates destroy ancient DNA rapidly, making direct genetic tests extremely difficult. Some studies of modern genomes have suggested ancestry from unidentified archaic human populations. Researchers sometimes call these hypothetical contributors ghost populations. Connecting those genetic signals specifically to Homo erectus remains speculative. A ghost does not become Homo erectus merely because the timeline feels convenient. Still, the wider lesson is clear. Later Pleistocene Asia hosted more human diversity than scientists once imagined. You walk south again as the cold fades. A new African population now becomes visible on the evolutionary horizon. Roughly 300,000 years ago, fossils displaying early Homo sapiens characteristics appear in Africa. Their skulls contain a mixture of familiar and archaic features. Faces are becoming more graceful. Brain cases gradually take on the rounded form associated with later modern humans. Your species has entered the story, but you do not conquer the planet immediately. For tens of thousands of years, Homo sapiens remains only one human population among several. Neanderthals occupy Western Eurasia. Denisovan-related in Asia. Other enigmatic populations may exist across regions where fossils remain sparse. And remarkably, Homo erectus still seems to persist in Java. You return to that warm river landscape. Cicadas pulse from the trees. Moist air settles heavily against your skin. Along the riverbank walks a human whose lineage reaches backward toward a world almost 2 million years old. Elsewhere, humans now carry different bodies and different histories. Some have larger brains. Some use technologies never seen by the earliest Homo erectus. Some will eventually meet and exchange genes. Yet the ancient survivor remains. For the first time, however, longevity alone may no longer be enough. The human landscape has changed. New competitors are appearing. New behaviors are spreading. Populations are moving farther and interacting in ways earlier humans rarely could. You watch the Javan figures disappear behind riverside vegetation. Their world still feels secure, but the isolation that once protected them may now become a weakness. Another human species is approaching the wider stage, and this newcomer, Homo sapiens, will eventually spread with an unsettling speed that even Homo erectus never matched. Section 2. The river appears again before you see the people. It moves slowly through the Javan landscape, carrying brown sediment beneath a heavy tropical sky. Moist air presses against your skin. The smell of mud leaves and warm water rises from the banks as insects pulse steadily in the vegetation. You have returned to the Solo River, but enormous stretches of time have passed since Eugène Dubois first entered this part of your journey. The humans living here now belong to the final known chapter of Homo erectus. They do not know that, of course. To them, the river is simply water. The forest is simply forest. The animals moving through the floodplain are simply opportunities, dangers, and familiar parts of daily life. Extinction is never experienced as a species-wide event. It happens one population at a time. You follow several individuals along a broad river terrace near a place future researchers will call Ngandong. The ground is firm beneath your feet, though lower areas remain damp from seasonal flooding. Tall grasses bend in the warm wind. Farther away trees gather thickly along quieter channels. A large animal calls somewhere beyond the vegetation. The group stops. Everyone listens. Then movement resumes. These people look recognizably connected to the Homo erectus populations you have followed across much of the story. Their skulls retain the long, low shape characteristic of the lineage. Heavy brow ridges remain. The cranial bones are thick, yet they also belong to a very late population separated from early African forms by an almost unimaginable distance in time. The fossils from Ngandong were discovered during excavations in the early 20th century. Caps and other human remains emerged from terrace deposits near the Solo River. For decades, their age became one of paleoanthropology's most persistent arguments. Some researchers placed them surprisingly recently. Others argued they must be much older. Dating river sediments is not always simple. Flooding moves material. Bones can be redeposited. Layers can become mixed. A fossil may end up resting somewhere different from the place where the body originally entered the landscape. The river is beautiful. It is also a terrible archivist. Modern dating work has greatly improved the picture. The Ngandong Homo erectus fossils are now generally estimated to be roughly 117,000 to 108,000 years old. If those dates are correct, these individuals represent some of the youngest securely dated Homo erectus remains known. You pause beside the water and consider the number. 110,000 years ago feels unimaginably ancient by the standards of civilization. For Homo erectus, it is almost the end. By this time, your own species already exists in Africa. Neanderthals occupy parts of Western Eurasia. Denisovan-related populations inhabit portions of Asia. The human world contains several distinct lineages at once, and here in Java, one of the oldest surviving human forms continues beside the river. The overlap is extraordinary. It does not necessarily mean these groups met. Geography matters. Southeast Asian seas, forests, mountains, and changing coastlines could separate populations for long periods. Direct evidence that late Javan Homo erectus encountered Homo sapiens remains lacking. That absence is important. It is tempting to imagine a dramatic meeting between the ancient survivor and the newcomer. Archaeology does not currently give you that scene. You should not invent it simply because it would make excellent television. Instead, you watch the group continue along the floodplain. One individual carries a stone object. Another seems to hold something wooden, though such materials almost never survive long enough to verify your imagination. Their technology may look modest compared with some contemporary humans elsewhere, but familiar tools can remain effective when local environments remain familiar. A population does not need symbolic art or intricate blades to cross a river, butcher an animal, or gather plants. Yet the environment around them may be changing. Studies of the Ngandong fauna suggest these late Homo erectus populations inhabited relatively open environments associated with the Solo River system. Over time, regional climate and vegetation shifted. More humid rainforest conditions expanded in parts of Java. Animals adapted to open woodland or grassland could decline or move elsewhere. If Homo erectus depended heavily on those ecosystems, shrinking habitats may have created serious pressure. This is one of the strongest ecological ideas surrounding their disappearance. The species that survived so many environmental changes may finally have encountered a transformation that reduced its preferred habitat beyond recovery. But no single explanation is certain. Researchers still disagree over how directly changing vegetation contributed to the extinction of late Javan Homo erectus. Population size may also have mattered. Small isolated groups are fragile even when individuals are capable. A severe flood can remove several members. A run of poor seasons can reduce births. Disease can spread through a community. Young adults may fail to find enough unrelated partners if neighbouring groups disappear. None of these problems requires a dramatic catastrophe. Demography can destroy a population quietly. Imagine a group of 50 becoming 40, then 30. Then a few scattered families. Nothing announces extinction. The final generation may never know that nobody remains beyond the next valley. You hear the river lapping softly against the bank. The sound feels as almost too peaceful for what you're imagining. That may be appropriate. Species usually disappear without ceremony. There is no final speech. No last representative stands dramatically beneath the sunset. There is only one child who does not survive. One adult who never finds another group. One in camp that is not occupied again. One familiar tool tradition that ends because nobody remains to teach it. The quirky detail is that Nyandong itself may preserve a very unusual death assemblage. The human skulls were found alongside large quantities of animal remains within river terrace deposits. Scientists have debated how these bones accumulated together. Flood processes may have transported and concentrated them. Some remains could have originated upstream. This means the fossils you imagine as one community may not represent one tragic event at all. They may have been gathered naturally by the river over time. Once again, geology refuses to provide a simple final scene. You move upstream. The heat becomes heavier in the afternoon. Mosquitoes gather in shaded areas. Mud sticks between your toes. A storm begins forming beyond distant hills where dark clouds gather above the green horizon. The late Homo erectus group pauses beneath trees. A younger individual sits close to an older adult. For a moment, nothing separates them emotionally from the people you met nearly 2 million years earlier. There is still learning, still waiting, still hunger, still weather, still the daily effort of keeping children alive long enough to become adults. That continuity is what makes the end feel strange. You have watched the lineage cross huge distances. You saw it enter the Caucasus with surprisingly small brains. You watched hand axes endure for more than 1 million years. You followed populations into colder China and tropical Java. You saw them survive droughts, shifting forests, changing coastlines, predators, and repeated climate cycles. Now there are history narrows to one region. That shrinking range may itself be the warning. Long-lived species often survive through geographical spread. When populations occupy many regions, local disasters do not destroy the entire lineage. A's Homo erectus disappears from much of its former range that protection weakens. Java becomes less a stronghold than a final refuge. Then even the refuge changes. Rain begins falling. Large drops strike leaves with deep hollow sounds. The group moves towards slightly higher ground. Water already gathers inside old footprints. Within minutes, the smell of wet earth overwhelms everything else. You wonder whether these people noticed their world becoming wetter across generations. Perhaps they simply saw familiar animals growing rarer. Perhaps certain routes became harder. Perhaps forest closed over open areas where older people remembered grass. Environmental transformation does not need to be understood scientifically to be felt personally. Soon these last known populations disappear from the fossil record. Whether some survived longer in places not yet discovered remains possible. Fossils provide minimum survival dates, not perfect extinction calendars. A younger site could still be waiting beneath sediment somewhere in Southeast Asia. For now, however, Nyandong stands near the end. The rain softens. Mist rises from the solar river. Several figures move slowly away from the bank and disappear among trees. You remain behind. The water continues flowing as though nothing important has happened. For nearly 2 million years, this ancient human lineage kept finding another valley, another river, another generation. Now the record grows silent, and in that silence waits the hardest question of the entire journey. What finally ended them? Section 19. The rain over the solar river has stopped, but the silence remains. You stand where the last known Homo erectus populations once moved through the Javan landscape, listening to water slide slowly past the bank. The air feels heavier after the storm. Wet leaves shine beneath a pale skin. Mud presses softly beneath your feet, and the smell of river sediment mixes with warm vegetation. Nothing here looks like the end of a species. That is the first important lesson. Extinction rarely arrives as one dramatic moment. There is usually no single disaster, no obvious final battle, and no clear day when an entire lineage simply disappears. Instead, pressure accumulates. Habitats shrink, numbers fall, neighboring groups vanish. Food becomes less predictable. Then one population fails to recover from a bad season. Another fails somewhere else. Eventually nobody remains. For Homo erectus, that gradual explanation fits much of what the evidence suggests. By the time of the youngest known fossils from Gandong, the species had already disappeared from most regions where earlier populations once lived. Its immense geographical range had contracted. That matters because range is protection. When thousands ahead of populations occupy many landscapes, local disasters remain local. A drought in one valley does not end the species. A volcanic eruption in one region leaves distant populations untouched. But when the entire surviving lineage becomes concentrated in a smaller region, every environmental disruption becomes more dangerous. Java may have become a final refuge. Then the refuge itself began changing. You walk inland from the river as the clouds break apart above you. The landscape around late Homo erectus was not frozen in tropical perfection. Climate shifted repeatedly. Vegetation changed. Open woodland and grassier environments gave way in some areas to wetter, more densely forested conditions. Animal communities changed with them. Large mammals adapted to open habitats could decline, migrate, or disappear locally. If late, Homo erectus relied strongly on those animals and open landscapes, ecological change would reduce familiar opportunities. This does not require complete dietary specialization. Even flexible generalists develop preferred routines. They know certain animals. They know certain routes. They recognize familiar seasonal patterns. When those patterns collapse, flexibility has limits. You imagine an older individual standing beside a forest edge that did not exist during childhood. Trees now cover ground once crossed openly. A familiar grazing herd no longer appears. One water route has shifted. Another feeding area lies beyond denser vegetation. No single change is fatal. Together they make every week slightly harder. That may be how long-lived species finally become vulnerable. Success itself can create inertia. A strategy that works for hundreds of thousands of years can become difficult to abandon completely. Yet environment alone may not explain everything. Population size matters just as much. A small population lives close to a statistical cliff. Imagine several neighboring groups containing only a few dozen individuals each. One group loses adults during a flood. Another experiences poor food availability. A third has too few surviving children. Within several generations, social networks weaken. Potential mates become harder to find. Knowledge transmission becomes fragile. One highly skilled toolmaker dies and a particular technique disappears with that person. Demographic decline can erase culture before it erases bodies. Researchers sometimes call this a population bottleneck, though the exact demographic history of late Homo erectus remains uncertain. The principle is straightforward. Small populations have less room for bad luck. Bad luck is surprisingly powerful. A species can possess excellent tools, flexible diets, and strong social bonds, yet still lose enough individuals at the wrong time. Evolution does not guarantee fairness. It rewards whoever happens to remain. You continue walking beneath the dripping branches. A broken stone tool lies in the mud. It's tempting to search for some final technological failure. Perhaps Homo erectus could not compete with newer humans using more sophisticated weapons. Perhaps their technology changed too slowly. That idea has often appeared in older discussions of human evolution. It should be treated carefully. There is no firm evidence showing a direct technological contest in which Homo sapiens arrived on Java and displaced the final Homo erectus groups. The youngest known. Homo erectus fossils may predate clear modern human presence in the region by a substantial margin, so the dramatic image of two species meeting beside the Solo River remains unsupported. You do not need a prehistoric showdown. Ecology may have done enough. Still, competition could have mattered elsewhere. Across the wider Old World, later human populations possessed different behavioral packages. Some used increasingly varied toolkits. Some exploited new resources. Some developed broader exchange networks and more complex social connections. When population ranges overlapped, these differences could influence access to food and territory. Historians and paleoanthropologists still argue over how much competition contributed to the disappearance of various archaic humans. For Homo erectus, specifically, the evidence remains frustratingly indirect. Competition is possible. A clean replacement story is not. Then there is volcanic activity. Java sits within one of the most geologically active regions on Earth. Eruptions repeatedly reshaped landscapes throughout the Pleistocene. Ash can bury vegetation. Rivers can change course. Animals can disappear locally. Massive eruptions elsewhere in Southeast Asia, including the later Toba supereruption around 74,000 years ago, have inspired theories about severe effects on human populations. But the youngest known Ngandong, Homo erectus fossils appear older than Toba. That eruption therefore cannot neatly explain their disappearance. The timeline refuses the convenient villain. Other eruptions may have affected local populations, but no specific volcanic event currently provides a universally accepted extinction mechanism. It is another reminder that spectacular explanations are not always the strongest ones. Sometimes a forest expanding for thousands of years matters more than one exploding mountain. You hear thunder far away. Java continues to remind you that landscapes here are never completely stable. Another intriguing possibility involves disease. When populations move and occasionally encounter unfamiliar groups, pathogens can travel with them. Modern history offers many examples of disease-devastating communities with little immunity. Could something similar have affected archaic humans? Perhaps, but evidence this ancient is almost impossible to recover. Bones rarely preserve the microorganisms responsible for short-lived infections, especially in tropical climates. So disease remains plausible but largely invisible. It belongs to the long list of things that may have happened without leaving enough evidence to test confidently. You return mentally to the beginning of the journey. Nearly 2 million years ago, early Homo erectus succeeded partly because it was adaptable. Long legs allowed mobility. A broad diet reduced dependence on one resource. Stone tools opened new foods. Social learning preserved useful behavior. Fire later in the story expanded possibilities further. Geographical spread protected distant populations from local disaster. Those strengths worked spectacularly, but none was infinite. Mobility cannot help if suitable habitats vanish across an entire region. A broad diet cannot compensate forever when population numbers collapse. Social learning cannot continue if too few learners survive. A wide range cannot protect a species after the range itself contracts. Every survival strategy has a boundary. For Homo erectus, that boundary may finally have been reached through several pressures arriving together. Climate changed, habitats shifted, population numbers likely declined, isolation increased, perhaps competition or disease added further strain, and chance decided the details. This combined explanation is less satisfying than one dramatic cause. It is also more realistic. Species usually disappear through interacting problems rather than one perfect catastrophe. The quirky irony is that Homo erectus may have survived nearly 2 million years without ever facing a single enemy capable of defeating it completely. Instead, a collection of ordinary pressures may have succeeded, where saber-toothed cats' droughts, cold periods, and changing continents failed. Not one great blow, just too many small ones. The evening settles over the river again. Frogs begin calling from the wet margins. Mosquitoes gather above still water. The air feels warm against your face. You imagine one final Homo erectus group moving beneath the trees. There is no reason to assume they feel doomed. They search for food. They watch children. They remember paths. They probably expect another season. That is what makes extinction difficult to imagine from the inside. The last generation does not know it is last. It simply becomes smaller, then quieter, then absent. The solar river keeps flowing. Forest closes over abandoned ground. Tools become buried. Skulls settle into sediment. And after almost 2 million years, one of humanity's longest-running stories ends without an audience. Only much later will another human species arrive, dig into the earth, and realize what was lost. That species is yours. And now, with the ancient survivor finally gone, you are left with a strange comparison. Homo erectus endured for a span of time far longer than Homo sapiens has existed so far. The final question is no longer why they failed. It is what their extraordinary survival says about us. Section 20. The solar river grows quiet behind you as the final traces of Homo erectus disappear beneath forest sediment and time. For a moment, there is only water. It slides around stones exactly as it did when those ancient humans walked beside its banks. These move gently overhead. The evening air carries the smell of wet earth, warm vegetation and rain settling somewhere beyond the horizon. Then you begin walking backward through everything you have seen. Not backward through geography, backward through time. Java loosens its hold on you. Northern China returns. The dark chambers of Zhuodian appear briefly beneath cold air and limestone cliffs. Farther west, the Caucasian valleys rise again beneath mist. Then Africa opens beneath an enormous sky. Nearly 2 million years of footsteps stretch behind you. You finally understand the strange truth hidden inside tonight's journey. The survivor was not us. Not yet. Homo sapiens has existed for roughly 300,000 years. That sounds extraordinarily ancient until you place those years beside the lifespan commonly associated with Homo erectus. Depending on how researchers classify its earliest and latest populations, the lineage endured for well over 1 million years and perhaps close to 2 million. Your own species has completed only a fraction of that distance. If human species were judged solely by longevity, Homo erectus would currently have the stronger resume. Your civilization looks even younger. Agriculture emerged only within roughly the last 12,000 years. Cities arrived later. Writing is younger still. Industrial society occupies only a thin sliver at the very end. The machines surrounding you belong to an almost invisible moment when measured against Pleistocene time. That comparison can feel uncomfortable. Modern people often imagine technological sophistication as proof of evolutionary success. You have satellites, medicine, computers, aircraft, and cities glowing through the night. Homo erectus had stone, wood, memory, social bonds, and eventually some form of fire use. Yet those apparently modest tools supported populations through climatic transformations repeated hundreds of times. The question almost asks itself, which species should be considered more successful? There is no scientific scoreboard. Evolution does not award medals for intelligence. Success can mean surviving long enough to reproduce. It can mean expanding geographically. It can mean adapting to changing ecosystems. By those measures, Homo erectus performed remarkably well. They became one of the first human lineages to spread far beyond Africa. They reached the Caucasus extraordinarily early. Populations moved across vast portions of Asia. Some lived in tropical Southeast Asia. Others occupied colder northern regions. Their descendants or close relatives developed tool traditions that remained useful across spans longer than entire recorded civilizations. The mainstream fact beneath all of this is simple. Homo erectus was among the longest-lived and most geographically successful human lineages known from the fossil record. But longevity did not depend upon standing still. That is the lesson you almost missed. Early individuals were not identical to late ones. Their skulls changed, brain sizes varied, bodies differed between regions, technologies appeared unevenly. Some populations may deserve separate species names entirely. Scholars continue debating how broad Homo erectus should be as a category, especially regarding African forms often called Homo agaster. So the famous 2-million-year survivor may represent one variable species, several connected populations, or a broader evolutionary grade stretching across deep time. That uncertainty does not weaken the story. It makes the story more realistic. Survival rarely means remaining unchanged. It means changing enough. You see the hand axe again. Its stone surface catches pale sunlight. Generations learned to shape similar objects without written instructions. Think about how fragile that transmission actually was. There was no manual, no archive, no video explaining the correct striking angle. Every piece of practical knowledge had to pass through living individuals. A child watched, an adult demonstrated, a mistake was corrected, a useful technique survived. Then the child grew older and repeated the process. Thousands upon thousands of times. The hand axe endured because memory endured. The same was true for landscapes. Where is water? When do certain fruits ripen? Which animal paths remain safe? Where can useful stone be collected? Which shelter protects against the wind? None of those answers existed outside minds and behavior. Lose the people and the information disappears. That makes the persistence of ancient traditions quietly extraordinary. There is also the strange little detail of the toothless Demonisi individual. You remember that healed jaw from much earlier in the journey. Most teeth had disappeared before death, yet the individual survived afterward. Perhaps companions helped provide softer food. Perhaps tools made eating possible. Perhaps nature provided enough easily processed resources. Though one can prove compassion from that fossil, still it reminds you that survival may never have been merely individual. A long-lived species needs bodies. A human lineage also needs relationships. Children must be protected. Skills must be learned. Food sometimes must be shared. Danger must be communicated. Even the strongest walker cannot reproduce a 2-million-year history alone. You return to the African grassland where you first saw the figure walking beneath the fading sun. Your legs move through vegetation. The body is built for travel. That anatomical change seemed almost mundane at first. Now it feels foundational. Walking open space, carrying connected resources. Stone extended the hand. Fire eventually altered food and darkness. Culture allowed useful behavior to survive beyond one lifetime. Flexibility linked everything together. There was no single superpower. That may be the deepest answer. Homo erectus survived because it possessed enough solutions rather than one perfect solution. When woodland changed, movement helped. When food shifted, dietary flexibility helped. When stone differed, toolmakers adapted. When climates fluctuated, geographically separated populations provided resilience. When children needed years of learning, social groups carried knowledge forward. The strategy was broad. Broad strategies survive unpredictable worlds. Your own species possesses that same inheritance in an exaggerated form. Homo sapiens became extraordinarily adaptable. Humans now inhabit deserts, Arctic coasts, tropical forests, high mountains, islands, and dense cities. Culture allows behavior to change far faster than anatomy ever could. You wear clothing instead of waiting for fur to evolve. You build shelter rather than waiting for thicker bones. You transport food instead of depending entirely upon whatever grows nearby. In that sense, the ancient pattern never vanished. It accelerated. But there is one enormous difference. Your species changes environments as aggressively as it adapts to them. Forests can disappear within decades. Rivers can be redirected. Species can be moved between continents. Climate itself can be altered through cumulative human activity. That power creates possibilities Homo erectus never faced. It also creates vulnerabilities they never created for themselves. The comparison should not become a prediction. Nobody knows how long Homo sapiens will survive. 300,000 years is neither proof of future success nor evidence of imminent failure. Species' lifespans cannot be forecast simply by comparing calendars. Researchers still argue over why certain human lineages persisted longer than others, because survival depends upon environment, population structure, biology, chance, and countless interactions that fossil evidence preserves imperfectly. Still, deep time changes your perspective. Modern civilization can feel permanent because one human lifetime is short. A building standing for 300 years seems ancient. A nation lasting several centuries feels established. A species surviving 2 million years makes both look temporary. You imagine your entire recorded history compressed into a narrow mark scratched across a stone. Then you imagine Homo erectus stretching far beyond it. The comparison is almost absurd, yet there is no reason to feel diminished. You are not standing outside their story. You belong to the same larger human experiment, not necessarily as their direct descendant in every simple sense, because human evolution branches too messily for that language. But the traits you recognize in them belong to your deeper evolutionary heritage. Walking upright, learning socially, sharing space, using tools, adapting behavior, watching children copy adults, gathering near warmth, remembering places. Those behaviors connect the ancient grassland with the room where you are listening now. And perhaps that is the quieter meaning of their extraordinary endurance. Human survival began long before humans looked like you. It was practiced by populations who never saw cities, never heard engines, and never imagined planets beyond the night sky. They survived without knowing they were part of history. They simply woke each morning and solved whatever problem stood closest. Water, food, weather, children, distance, darkness. Then another generation did the same, and another, until almost 2 million years had passed. Now the pace can soften. The landscapes you visited tonight begin slipping gently away. The limestone cave grows dark. The Javan River becomes silver beneath moonlight. Rain settles quietly into broad tropical leaves. Farther north, cold wind moves through empty grass. Beyond the Caucasus, mist collects again inside ancient valleys. And finally, Africa returns beneath a sky crowded with stars. You no longer need to follow the travelers. Let them continue without you. A small group moves slowly across the grass. Their footsteps are almost impossible to hear. One adult carries something beside the body. A younger figure stays close. Another pauses briefly and looks across the darkening plain. There is no urgency now, only distance. The earth beneath them is warm from the fading day. Cool air settles around their shoulders. Insects begin their soft nighttime rhythm. Faraway water moves somewhere beyond the trees. The ancient humans continue toward it. You can let the numbers disappear. 2 million years no longer needs to be imagined. 300,000 years can fade as well. There is only one evening inside an unimaginably long story. Hearth beneath quiet stars. One generation walking where another walked before. The people grow smaller as they move toward the horizon. Soon you can no longer distinguish individual figures. Then even the landscape begins dissolving into darkness. The hand axes remain beneath sediment. Old camps become layers of earth. Footprints disappear after rain. Rivers change their courses. Forests rise and fall. And time continues without needing anyone to count it. Your own breathing can become slower now. The journey has reached its end. For tonight there are no more valleys to cross, no more ancient files to search for, no more fossils waiting beneath the next layer. Only the quiet thought that humanity's story is much older, stranger, and more patient than it first appears. Long before us, another kind of human walked beneath these same stars. They endured. For an almost impossible length of time, they simply kept going. And now the grass closes softly behind them.